Good morning and welcome to the October 11th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. We have 5 items coming out of committees this morning and 9 other discussion items today. I would ask for commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments so we can move through the agenda efficiently. We start every meeting with the opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda today? Please come forward.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Doug Johnston. I live at 120 Forest Road. And when I was recently on the Appearance Commission, I got the idea of improving the appearance of the Greenway. Since then, I've been concentrating on that, and I'd like to speak to you briefly, let me know when my 3 minutes are up, about looking at how what I'm trying to achieve would affect the role and duties and expectations of the members of this commission. The greenways, anywhere you pick a random spot on the greenway, in front of you, behind you, on either side, it's green. It looks really, really good now, and regrettably, it's going to be the victim of death by 1,000 cuts. So I've been trying to assemble interest among different groups, Appearance Commission, Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, Raleigh DOT, Planning and Zoning, of course, Greenway Advisory Board, and other stakeholders like the Greenway City of Oaks Committee and the Green Foundation and the City of Oaks and those kind of things. And they seem to be kind of getting together. So my request today is for the chair or to consider someone getting some details from me about this to see if it has any legs with the work you're planning to do. There's enough on the agenda without listening to me anymore, but I'd be grateful and happy to spend a half hour with an interested member or whatever the chair might prefer to flesh out this concept. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else here who wished to speak on an item that is not contained on the agenda? No? Seeing none, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. There's one item on the consent agenda today. This is rezoning case Z5121 on Atlantic Avenue. Staff recommends a deferral of this case to our October 25th meeting to allow new conditions to be received. Without objection, I move to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second? Second. We have Commissioner Dautel as a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion to move this to our October 25th meeting? Okay. By show of hands, those in support and any opposed, that motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the committee reports, there are 2 items coming out of the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee from our September 22nd meeting. The first item is item D.1, which is case CP 822. This is a privately initiated amendment to map T1 street plan of the 2030 comprehensive plan to remove a proposed street extending from Waketown Drive to East Six Forks Road, and a new policy APMT 21 waterfront district blocks to the Midtown area specific guidance in section 16. We heard this item at the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee on September 22nd, where the committee voted unanimously to approve with revised language. There are some subsequent revisions after this point, so I will ask for a brief staff update to outline revisions to the case. Thank you, Mr. Belk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the Planning Commission. A few changes to talk about with this case since it was heard at committee. The proposal to remove the proposed public street from the street plan remains. However, there has been a text policy added to the Midtown area-specific guidance for some specific street types that would be triggered in particular development scenarios, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. This proposal is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. This shows the segment of the street plan that would be removed in this proposal, basically stretching from Waketown Drive to East Six Forks Road, as shown here. These have been removed. The removal of the public street from the Midtown urban form map and the Midtown transportation map. Both of those have been withdrawn, so those streets would remain in the area-specific guidance. Here's the new text policy regarding waterfront district blocks, and it basically describes that block where the amendment is shown and specifies the cross sections that would be limited, specifying a primary internal access drive in the case of development of 2 to 3 stories. This would not be applicable to any development plans for single-story buildings. If proposed development is 4 stories or greater, this would call for a main street parallel parking or an avenue 2-lane undivided section. So again, this proposal is to remove from the street plan the through street along Sherman Oaks Place, the street connecting Waketown Drive and East Six Forks Road. As you heard at the committee, this site, this development was in the beginning stages during the time of the Midtown area plan process. However, I'll let the applicant speak to that, but the proposal moved forward, and now there is a site plan for this area that's also proposing a new lot. This is for the purpose of developing a drive-through only restaurant. As a result of the changes since committee, some of these policies now have been moved into the consistent column, transportation in support of walkable neighborhoods, connectivity, and 2 of these area-specific, the Midtown policies. Several inconsistent policies remain in this proposal as a result of the proposal to remove the street from the street plan. Your deadline for action is the 12th of December, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Due to the nature of this change, I'm going to see if we can also get an update from the applicant. So without objection, I'd like to allow the applicant an additional 6 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the Commission. I'm Collier Marsh with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street on behalf of the applicant. So as you all may recall from the first meeting, we were presented with a project where our client has worked to redevelop what was formerly a struggling retail shopping center and has systematically added out parcels which have now resulted in being able to lease out the anchor tenant space. So it's been a successful project, but as we neared the final stage of that project and what was just a corner lot for a Chick-fil-A, In the meantime, the Midtown Plan was adopted, and that calls for a street running right through that redevelopment that they'd been working on for several years. And so we came to the Planning Commission a few weeks back with a proposal that essentially asked to remove the street from all maps and put in a policy that said, if the property was rezoned 4 stories or greater, then the street should come back into play. And y'all weren't satisfied with that, and rightfully so. We were trying to find the right balance for this project. What we're trying to do is achieve the short-term redevelopment goal while keeping all of the vision of the Midtown Plan open. And when we came to you the last time, we didn't have a good solution. We are now keeping in the street in these plans, but so just to, again, remind everybody, this was the parcel that triggered that street, so the bottom right corner, but it triggered the street running right through the middle of the site through those 2 out parcels that were recently redeveloped. And then we see at the street level, again, those were built in 2021, and now we were told we've got to run a street through your new bank and your new restaurant. So a little shocking to the client. We just wanted to find a good solution to keep this project going. As I mentioned, as the applicant, we had proposed a solution that wasn't satisfactory. I can't take credit for the solution that's before the Appearance Commission today. Staff really deserves all the credit on this. So planning staff, Bynum, John Anagnos, Don Belk, and then transportation staff, Jason Myers and Kevin Kidd, they got together and found the solution here and proposed it to us. And so we're very grateful for that. And so what the solution is let me make sure I get to the right one. Now we're telling you exactly what streets you're going to get at each stage in the process. And so what the policies essentially say is with the 1-story development that is there today, you don't have to build a street through the middle of the site, which is what we were asking for. Now the concern was, as soon as you do anything more and the Midtown Plan is starting to be realized, that street is important. We need it. And so what it now says is that 2 and 3 stories, there's a private access drive that's constructed. That private access drive is a UDO defined access drive. It has dedicated right-of-way. So it, in all aspects, functions as a public street. It's just a narrower street section. But it also says at 4 stories or greater, you get the full Main Street parallel parking that was sought with the Midtown Plan. And ultimately, in discussions with staff, what we all concluded is the vision was not to have a street running through the property as developed today, but upon the redevelopment consistent with the Midtown Plan, that's when that street should be constructed. That's exactly what this policy now provides for. And so with that, the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee did unanimously recommend approval, and so we respectfully request that the Appearance Commission, the Planning Commission, and I apologize, follow that lead and vote to recommend approval of this. We are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Just want to check in and see if there are any members of the public who wish to speak on this item. Seeing none, I'll move on to questions and comments from commissioners. Go ahead, Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. I'm just a little confused. I'm so confused I don't even know how to. You mentioned that there were some issues that you wanted to address, but I thought when we met in committee and recommended unanimously to approve the case, the issues had been resolved. So it feels like it's completely different now, so This
is exactly as presented to the committee. So the issues, I guess, were from the prior Planning Commission hearing. Those were addressed to the committee, and now we've presented it as recommended by the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee.
So this is what we heard in committee?
Yes. The difference was that the application had not formally been filed, so we had to get the green light, so we then submitted the signed version so that it could be considered by the Planning Commission.
Okay. I'm good now.
Any additional questions? Go ahead, Commissioner O'Haver.
So the difference between a 1-story building and a 2-story building, it seems like I get it, and I think my comments at the last meeting were applauding the redevelopment and changes that have gone there, so I want to continue that. I guess I'm trying to figure out what the difference is between multiple one-story buildings in that area are still going to cause a need for connectivity regardless of a 2 or 3-story building. So I'm just trying to think through this. We're going to continue along. The plan is to continue along with these one-story out parcels. The street's not required. The Midtown plan continues to develop, but the road will not be constructed until, you had mentioned rezoning, but the text says the development plan, 2 or 3-story buildings, and then obviously a larger street for 4-story building. Am I reading that correct?
Yeah, so a development plan at 2 stories would trigger it. And so the logic behind this is that we've maxed out the site at 1-story development. So when we tried to explore some of the options recommended by the Planning Commission at the initial meeting were, could you do a smaller right-of-way through the parcel? Could you do a pedestrian passage through the parcel? And when we looked at it, every instance, we are maxed out on parking requirements for all of our tenants, so there was no room to give. So the assurance I can give you with that is that if we are to do more on this site, it's going to have to go vertical and it's going to have to reconfigure the parking to add more because we're at the max. And that's why this was the final shot to finish the project. And then the next one that comes in, we'll have to rethink all those leases and rethink the current configuration to do more.
Yeah, because we deal with this issue sort of in other ways of, you've got some 1-story buildings along that avenue. You want to redevelop a 2 or 3-story, but you're not going to tear down that 1-story building to increase the internal drive. So I'm just trying to figure out when that internal access drive would be constructed. Any 2 or 3-story building, you're going to have to deal with all the leases on there. And
yeah, anyone,
okay.
we're faced with that issue. And I think what it means is that when you have somebody that redevelops this site, they're going to do something more meaningful because what it's going to take to get there encourages you to do more with the site, further in line with the Midtown plan.
If there are no further questions from the commission, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Bennett?
I move to recommend approval of the proposed comprehensive plan amendment. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan and future land use map.
And do we have a second? We have a motion by Commissioner Bennett to recommend approval of CP 822 and a second from Commissioner Otwell. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.2, this is case CP 1022. This is a city-initiated amendment to the comprehensive plan. We heard this item at the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee on September 22nd, where the committee voted to unanimously approve. I will start with a brief summary of the proposal from staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning again, members of the Planning Commission. This CP10 proposal has 3 component parts. 2 of them you heard at the committee meeting. Also wanted to indicate that we did renotice both CP10A and CP10B so that these were noticed properly for this meeting. CPA, the first part of this is a proposal to adjust the alignment of T.W. Alexander Drive and change it from a 4-lane divided to a 2-lane divided. At the committee, we showed the alignment. As you can see, and this is just a general alignment, of course, but it would go through area right now that is the Page Family Farm. Members of the Page family were in attendance, and staff was able to address many of their questions regarding the timing and how this road might be developed into the future. Just to reiterate that this functional alignment has been reviewed by staff. There was an analysis performed, and amending this would do a number of things, provide the opportunity to increase efficiency and reduce costs of the street network, as well as reduce environmental impacts and improve multimodal mobility. It is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, a number here of the consistent policies. No outstanding issues with this particular one, and your deadline for action is December 21st. And I will move on now to the second piece, 10B. This is a proposal to adjust the alignment of Tryon Road between Garner Road and Quarry Ridge Lane, and again, changing its designation from 4-lane divided to 2-lane divided. A map of this proposed amendment, note its proximity to the town of Garner. The first part of this road, I will note, these vacant properties have recently, in the last year and a half, were rezoned, and then there was a text change to change conditions to allow the construction of apartments. The last time I checked, there has not been any site plan submitted for this, but the future of this avenue would be multifamily. Again, this alignment has been reviewed, a study conducted, and the benefits of the proposal as shown here. This portion is also consistent with the comprehensive plan overall, and note the consistent policies. An additional environmental protection policy here. This particular alignment runs through a headwaters area that's still very densely forested, and there are many jurisdictional wetlands identified in this area that would be accounted for during the development process. So reducing the width of the road would have some environmental benefits. And again, the deadline for this one is also December 21st. Thirdly, and this particular part did not get presented at committee, this one is a proposal to amend MAP T5. This case was previously submitted by a private entity. However, it was withdrawn, and the city staff decided to bring this back as a city-initiated amendment. It would amend MAP T5 to remove a planned interchange at Aviation Parkway and Globe Road, and a grade separation at Aviation and T.W. Alexander Drive. This would account for a future extension of Aviation Parkway as shown here on this map, along with the predominant residential land uses in that area. It's near the Briar Creek development. And again, just some background, that this was initially submitted as a CP 922, and it's now being part of this city-initiated amendment for CP 10. Some of the consistent policies, note the interjurisdictional transportation planning, T2.12, aligning with transportation planning with the city of Durham. No outstanding issues on this case. All of these have a deadline of December 21st. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Just want to check and see if we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item. Seeing none, I'll move on to questions or comments from commissioners. Do we have any questions or comments for Mr. Belk? Seeing none, then I'll entertain a motion. Commissioner Bennett?
Do we need 3 separate motions? Okay. Then I move to recommend approval of the proposed comprehensive plan amendment. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan and future land use map.
And do we have a second? Commissioner Otwell? Commissioner Bennett has offered a motion to recommend approval of CP 1022. Commissioner Otwell has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor and any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.3, this is Z7221, an assemblage on Lake Wheeler Road, Mercury Street, and Maywood Avenue, east of Lake Wheeler Road and west of South Saunders Street. This is a request to rezone approximately 31.29 acres from a mix of districts and heights to commercial mixed use, 20 stories, urban limited conditional use. Conditions limit certain uses, require certain urban design considerations, put a cap on certain uses on the site, provide for certain amenities, and require additional stormwater features, among others, as listed in the backup materials. This case was discussed at the Committee of the Whole on August 25th and September 22nd, where the committee voted to refer the request to the Planning Commission with no recommendation to allow the applicant to submit revised conditions. As I understand it, revised conditions have been submitted and include limiting a portion of the site to 12 stories, limiting some exterior building materials along Lake Wheeler Road, and requiring additional tenant notice for termination of leases. We have heard applicant and staff presentations on this item previously, and we have also heard from the public. So I will just check in to see if any commissioners have any questions or comments from staff. Commissioner Bennett?
Yes, thank you. With the new conditions, Hannah, did I read that the heights are still inconsistent with the recommendations of the Dix Edge area study, or no?
The heights are inconsistent with the current future land use map, and they are, actually maybe I can go to something visual to look at. They are not consistent with all of the recommendations. So should the Dix Edge future land use map amendments be adopted, this is what the future land use map would look like. A greater portion of the site would be regional mixed use, and so the height guidance would be looking at the contexts in table LU2, and so they would range from the core areas to the edge areas, and a portion of the site would also be moderate scale residential, so it would not be wholly consistent with those recommendations. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have any additional questions, or would you like some additional information about some of the heights per our discussion at committee? I'm seeing some head nods. If we have the applicant available, I believe we requested an exhibit at the last Committee of the Whole meeting.
And while you're walking up, I wanted to ask staff, or maybe it'll be clear in this exhibit. I know one of the concerns on the height was along the western edge of the project, where the area study would recommend a 12-story height limit. And at the Committee of the Whole meeting, the neighbors indicated that they were actually would support 20 stories in that area. So I'm curious, in addition to that 20 stories on the left side, on the western edge, if there are any other inconsistencies other than that one.
Thank you. Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group. You mentioned the neighbors' support for that height along the Lake Wheeler Road. What you see on your screen here is a map that was submitted to us by some of the neighbors, kind of outlining their height requests. And to get into your question, this is a little bit hard to read, but just to flip back and forth, where you see that pink outline of the 20-story height limit, it's still here on this map. This is overlaid with, here, this is an older version of the Dix Edge study map that was available to us in early summer. And here you see that red zone, which indicates a maximum of 20 stories being supported at that location. That was updated to show this. So this is the latest version of that draft plan. We did reach out to staff to understand that change and where that came from, and we understand that was sort of a practical change done because the lot depths were seen as not practical for the higher height. So this is the one that came out of close to 2 years of sort of outreach and policy review, and this was changed for what was described as sort of a practical reason. We're honestly a little bit confused by this. We don't feel that these lots are inappropriate for the 20 stories. So that's the current state of the situation. The other area, since you asked about inconsistencies, is over the yellow parcels on Summit. It's sort of a little peninsula that sticks out into this area. I suspect, and probably staff can confirm for you, that this was an example of staff not wanting to be presumptuous about changes that may come to this area and sort of just reflecting what was there today. Today, almost all of this area is part of the request before you. So that may represent a change and a way to go in a different direction and to make this area more consistent across the site. Did that answer your questions?
So the only parcel that's both inconsistent and not supported by the neighbors is the yellow sort of boot-looking peninsula piece?
That's the only major area, so depending on which map you're looking at, this is the later one that has a larger issue along Lake Wheeler Road.
And how much of that yellow boot is being rezoned in this case?
So you can see it here. It's, see if I can actually do this. So it's all except those two parcels.
And could you clarify how the rest of that yellow boot, what the height of that will be versus what the recommendation was?
Sure. So to go back here, that is all within the 12-story height limit. You can sort of see it overlaid here with that blue line cutting through.
Well, I know we had a split vote at the committee of the whole meeting, and I expect we may have one as well today. I'm not sure. Could you just clarify the implications for me on the ones that are, I'm trying to figure out which ones are not versus are. I was a little confused flipping between the two maps.
Here in that yellow section?
Yes.
Sure, so let me go. I think it's easier to see here. So to the right of this blue line here, you see those two parcels?
So it's those two.
Thank you. One moment, we have a better slide.
And what are those two parcels today?
Those are single-family houses.
Can we go back to the exhibit at the final proposed heights? Thank you.
So those two parcels on the north and southern side are already going to be bordered with 20-story properties?
That is the proposal, and in this location, it largely overlays with the Dix Edge plan as well.
Right. And those other pink parcels to these are consistent with their area study. I would typically be more concerned, but given the fact that the northern and southern borders are going to be more intrusive than the western side of these two parcels, I think that is consistent with the rest of the area study. And given that the western edge, the height increased to 20 stories, given the background of why it was, the area study indicated for lower height, and that the neighbors indicate their support for the higher height in this area, I will make a motion to approve this case and to adopt the proposed consistency statement in the agenda materials dated today's date. And I just want to amend that to add that this is reasonable and in the public interest because the neighbors, because along the western edge, of the project where 20 stories is in excess of the Dix Edge area study, the neighbors have indicated their support for the increased height.
We didn't ask if there were any members of the public here to speak about this. Since we heard from the applicant, I'd like to, because
Right.
we're assuming and presuming a lot about the neighborhood. I'd prefer to hear it from them if they're here.
Sure.
I can check in. It was in a response to a question. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Sure. Without objection, we'll give a total of 6 minutes. 6 minutes if people wish to speak on this item.
30 seconds.
Okay.
I'm Doug Johnston, 120 Forest Road. I really approve of this plan. I think the attention that it offers to the future development of Dix Park and the associated elements of the Healing Place and the Farmers Market and North Carolina NCSU Centennial Campus are a huge move, and I hope the Baker family, if they're still involved in the investment, are amply rewarded because it looks like it'll be a great project. I'm mentioning it because another part of my effort includes arranging things in the study area when the site plans were produced to make a better coalescence with the park and particularly the Play Plaza. And I'll just put this on the list of other things that it might be worth someone on the committee's while or commission's while to have a little further conversation with me, not only to see where I'm coming from and where I want to go, but to smarten me up. Because every time I talk to somebody, I learn how this is more exciting and can be made better. So 100% approval on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Jeff Roselli. I'm a longtime resident of the neighborhood at Carolee Mills. I am not in favor of this as proposed, and I've spoken before the Committee of the Whole and sent a number of letters and helped some of our neighbors understand this process better. I think where we have been willing to concede is at the edges of this proposed parcel. The Lake Wheeler and South Saunders parcels we feel are more appropriate for higher heights. We do feel that the 12 stories is not in keeping with the studies for this area, the Southern Gateway study, the Dix Edge area study. We feel the plans that we've provided to the applicant, we feel to be in better keeping with the neighborhood scale, north at Fuller Heights, south at Carolee Commons, to recognize the historic significance of the mill. We had suggested 4 to 7 stories for this middle parcels that have been proposed at 12. And I'll just give you a couple of quotes from the Dix Edge area study. Well, it allows for up to 12 stories. It does ask for growth in a responsible, contextual, and equitable manner, respect for the area's historical qualities, and to create transition areas between existing neighborhoods and new/planned developments. I think our issue is this proposal also comes with no development plan, and so the zoning at the heights that are proposed leaves this fairly open. We recognize the position of the Commission and the City Council to increase density close to downtown. We expect redevelopment of this area. We just think it needs to be considered more carefully given the proximity to residential neighborhoods and historic resources in the area. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Did I see one other member of the public here to speak on this item? No? Okay, moving back, we have a motion on the table. Vice Chair Miller has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z 7221. Do we have a second? I will offer a second. Gonna guess there may be some additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion. Yep.
I just have concerns. The staff report states it's inconsistent with the vision theme, growing successful neighborhoods and communities, and policies around scale of new commercial uses and impacts of commercial uses on residential areas. I have concerns to recommend an approval of something that staff is telling us is inconsistent with growing successful neighborhoods and communities. So I see other merits of the proposal, but that one is really important to me. And I think the potential impacts to the existing neighbors of this outweigh any other benefits I see of this.
I had a question about that too, actually, for staff. The center portions where the neighbors want less height, that actually is, the height proposed is consistent with the new area study. However, it states here in the staff report that that would be inconsistent with some of the other policies. So is it the area study itself is inconsistent with the policies, that policy?
Which policies are you referring to, just for clarification?
On the comprehensive plan analysis about the comprehensive plan consistency, the first item listed in the staff report, I was reading over Commissioner Bennett's shoulder. I'll pull it back up. Sorry about that. Sneaking. It says that it's inconsistent. It says while the request is consistent with the urban form map, it's inconsistent with the vision theme of growing successful neighborhoods and communities, and policies around scale of new commercial uses and impacts of commercial uses. But the area that the neighbors are concerned about are consistent with the area study. So is the area study itself inconsistent with the comprehensive plan otherwise?
Well, the Dix Edge area study, and I will flip back to this map. There's the form and function map, which we've discussed before, has several designations that indicate appropriate height, and then appropriate height higher than that if significant public benefits are provided. And so I think you're referring to those heights referenced in this map. The way that the comprehensive plan amendment is structured to implement that, would refer to, translates that into future land use map designations. I think these heights are recommended in addition to thoughtful context. So it's a combination of both. Both are considered.
So the only part that would be inconsistent under the staff report are the eastern and western edges that are in excess of the area study? And that the neighbors have already indicated their support for?
The areas that would be moderate scale residential would be inconsistent with those. And then height guidance that would be evaluated would be, I believe most of this would probably fall under a general context, which would be about 7 stories, or up to 12. It would be an evaluation of do the public benefits garner the extra height.
And for the center area that's indicated for 12 stories, the staff report says that the public benefits being offered are considered significant enough to warrant the 12 stories. Is that correct?
The staff report is indicating that the conditions, the types of benefits the conditions are offering are the types of things that are considered public benefits. Did not make an analysis on
Gotcha.
on that,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Was there additional comment?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
But if the public benefits being offered don't offset the detrimental benefits of the community in place, what are we doing? It doesn't, I don't see any mitigation of the impacts of 12 stories up against low-scale residential neighborhoods, historic neighborhood. The staff report also says the requested district would also permit building heights not envisioned by any of the designations in this context. Regional mixed use recommends building heights up to 20 stories in some contexts, but recommends no more than 7 stories outside of core transit areas and no more than 4 near existing lower scale residential areas. So I don't care how many dog parks you build or how much money you put in the wetland fund, that's great. But if you're still looking at 12 stories next to single-family homes, I don't see that that's a significant public benefit. I think the evaluation of what's significant and a public benefit is subjective. So in my opinion, yes, those are benefits. Yes, those are things that are important in this area. But in the context of putting this type of height up against single-family homes, it doesn't seem to be consistent with what we want to do to grow successful neighborhoods. So
Thank you
I'm
for
not
your
supportive
comments.
of this.
Ms. Rocco, can you pull up the exhibit that shows the transition zone and maybe describe how that works?
So this is the exhibit included with the zoning conditions. The part that indicates the transition zone is the sort of orange-brown block that is next to the green parcels. So there's a zoning condition that would require transition zone, neighborhood transition be applied there if a street is not constructed along that frontage. And just as a reminder, that's there because there is a little strip of right-of-way that would exempt development from that. And so that would has three parts to a neighborhood transition. One is the landscaped buffer. A second zone is use transition, so no buildings, but things like surface parking, amenity areas, and then a height transition. And so that would, the way the condition is written, it would be applying the transition for 100 feet from that property boundary. So building setback of at least 50 feet, and then a height starting at 40 feet and going up one by one, so 45-degree angle until 100 feet.
So along that edge, it's 40 feet tall? Is like about 4 stories?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to circle back. We have a motion on the table and a second. I'm going to call the vote by show of hands. Those in support? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And those opposed? 2. Motion passes 6-2.
Can I just make a comment?
Go right ahead.
Definitely voted in support, understand the growth in that area. I think for me, the factor that all of the zoning around it is regional mixed use, and again, we've got this pocket of moderate scale residential is challenging for me. So I certainly understand the concerns about the height. I'm sensitive to that, but I think overall it warrants a rezoning. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Okay, with no other comment, I'm going to move on to item D.4, still in the committee report. That's on Rock Quarry Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 62.78 acres from residential 6 conditional use and Wake County residential 30 to residential mixed use 3 stories conditional use, commercial mixed use 4 stories conditional use, and commercial mixed use 5 stories conditional use. This case appeared on the September 22nd Committee of the Whole agenda but was not discussed. So we will start off with a staff presentation.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. As indicated, this is almost 63 acres. That is east of the Battle Bridge Road and Rock Quarry Road fork. This site is within the Southeast Special Study Area. Part of it is within the Southeast Special Study Area. And you can see the nature of the site here and its proximity to the intersections with Whitfield Road and Rock Quarry, some streetscape views, still a lot of agricultural activity in this area. Number of conditions that prohibit certain uses, provide for pedestrian connection to a Greenway easement, both in the, and also the prohibition on certain uses in the C5 district as well. There's a maximum residential unit cap in both of these districts, as you see, and also a condition to construct at least one constructed wetland as part of the overall stormwater management plan for the property. Note the existing versus proposed. This would be substantial new development in this location. Note the number of maximum units and the square footage of office and retail. Scoring low on transportation and energy analysis. The site is not served by transit. The furthest extent of transit is to the Rock Quarry Battle Bridge Activity Center there at the fork that you see to the northwest. It would add to the housing supply and permit a variety of housing types, including smaller units, but it is not within walking distance of transit, as you saw. The land use history, a higher population of people of color, as well as higher low-income population. Rents have increased at a slower rate than the city average. This proposal, both the requested commercial mixed-use and residential mixed-use districts are inconsistent with the future land use map designation of low-scale residential. As I mentioned, this site in its totality, both tracks here, both rezoning proposed districts are within the Southeast Special Study Area. And the recommendations from that study this proposal would be inconsistent with the CESA recommendations. No urban form designation at this location. And again, it's inconsistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. These consistent policies again, this looking ahead to the Southeast study, which does encourage nodal development, is consistent with these two housing policies as well. Inconsistencies regarding the conditional uses and the zoning of annexed land and the location of growth. And it would amend the future land use map as shown here from community mixed use and then also to medium scale residential. There are no outstanding issues and your deadline for action is October 29th. One meeting that will occur before that deadline date. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Next, we are going to hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox and Commissioners. My name is Laura Good. I'm with Parker Poe. My business address is 301 Fayetteville Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant. Also here on behalf of the applicant today is Katie Hamilton. She is with Gander Development. Caroline Sheaves with Ramey Kemp, the traffic engineer for this site, as well as Luke Perkins and Ross Massey with Swift Partners, the site plan engineers for this project. This is a request to rezone two properties located at the intersection of Rock Quarry Road and Whitfield Road, approximately a half a mile southeast of the shops at Battle Bridge, and about a mile northwest of the planned I-540 extension that is planned to come just to the east of Auburn-Knightdale Road, which you can see down in the bottom left-hand side of this slide. The first request is for 6325 Rock Quarry Road, which is approximately 9 acres, a request to rezone from R6CU to CX4CU. The second is for 6720 Rock Quarry Road, which is south of Whitfield Road. This is a request for a split zoning here, approximately 19.7 acres along the frontage of Rock Quarry Road from Wake County R30 to CX5CU, and then the rear portion of that property, approximately 33 acres, from Wake County R30 to RX3CU, and an annexation petition has been filed for that southern property. Also note that this request to have the CX5 along the frontage and the RX3 along the back portion is also meant to be a transition in both density, height, and intensity of uses to smooth that transition to the surrounding lower scale residential developments. As Don mentioned, this request is inconsistent with the current future land use map designation of low scale residential and with certain comprehensive plan policies mainly focused on that inconsistency with the FLAME designation as well as inconsistency with annexation and location of growth. However, this rezoning is intended to be future looking and focused on the recommended changes under the SESA. And those final staff recommendations for the SESA just went to council last week and are coming to you for review shortly. So this slide shows the current future land use map. If you look at your top left-hand side of your screen, it shows it as currently being mostly low-scale residential in this area with a community mixed-use node at the intersection of Auburn, Knightdale, and Rock Quarry Road. However, the bottom left-hand side shows that final recommendation of the flume changes under the SESA. And that shows that community mixed-use node being relocated to the intersection where these properties are located. And also across the street, across Rock Quarry Road, recently passed last week unanimously the rezoning request for Z8121 that you saw recently as well. So that neighborhood mixed use that you see designated across the street is actually now a community mixed use flume as well, because that case had a CX designation there as well. You can also see that the larger area around this property, the SESA recommends a change in flume from low scale residential to moderate scale residential. And so then accordingly, you can see on the right side of your screen our map for our proposed rezoning, which was designed again to be consistent with that, with those changes recommended under the SESA for the future land use map. In addition to the flume changes recommended under SESA, SESA is also looking to extend the city's ETJ. It has broken up the SESA into 5 different steps. These properties are within step 1, which recommends immediate extension of the ETJ if this is adopted, which you would I believe Don can correct me, but I think that would be expected if adopted within the next year to 2 years there. And that extension of the ETJ would improve those consistencies with the location of growth and annexation of new lands. This next slide is to show you our rezoning timeline for this case. And the reason I show this to you is to let you know that this is a case we've been working on for over a year and a half. We have been intentional and deliberate throughout this process to have ongoing conversations with planning staff, with Councilmember Branch, who's the district representative, and to have that engagement with neighbors, because we wanted to make sure that the rezoning application we presented was consistent with the vision for this area and accommodates the amount of growth that is ongoing in this area and will continue to occur, especially with the 540 extension nearby. So when we started this back in January of 2021, we first had our staff meeting, our pre-application meeting with staff. We understood that it was well received by staff to have a rezoning that was consistent with forward-looking at the SESA recommendations instead of how the future land use map is written at this point in time. At that time, the SESA was still ongoing, so we had our first pre-submittal neighborhood meeting, but we waited to file the application because we wanted to attend the final community outreach session that was in June, wanted to look and see if there were any changes in the recommendations for the SESA for this property, and generally there were not. At that time, the SESA recommendations were supposed to go to council at the end of the summer in 2021, so we waited. We continued to wait, and this is not meant to be, critical at all. We're just explaining the timeline here and how we were trying to have our application be timed with the SESA, or actually behind that recommendation. Finally, we submitted our application at the end of 2021. We then had a TIA that we submitted, and then the SESA went to council last week, so it actually ended up timing out pretty nicely there. Another thing I wanted to point out is that we have, as Don mentioned, we have added several conditions for this case, kind of conditions for both CX portions to limit uses that are high traffic generators or just not appropriate uses for this area. But we also added several conditions in response to our initial staff review to bring this more in line with key comprehensive plan policies and SESA policies. And our understanding is that, again, there are no outstanding issues and there has not been a request from staff that we add conditions or change the case in a way that would make it more consistent with the current future land use map. So we also added that pedestrian connection in response to initial staff reviews to increase the pedestrian connectivity to support the SESA policies of improving Greenway and trails. So there's going to be a dedicated easement for a Greenway on the property to the north in that R6 CU portion that's also being developed by the same developer. We're committing to adding a pedestrian connection that would connect to that dedicated Greenway easement down to the sidewalks, either along the Rock Quarry frontage or the Whitfield Road frontage. That would allow pedestrian connection from that Greenway easement down there, and then eventually across Rock Quarry Road to the case across the street for Z8121 that had a similar pedestrian connection commitment to also connect to Greenway on that property as well. This next slide shows the conditions we've added for the other districts on the southern side. Again, similar prohibitions on intense commercial uses and residential caps just for traffic considerations. And finally, we also added a condition for the constructed wetland. That's in response to initial staff comments, again, for one of the CESA policies to encourage green stormwater practices. So overall, there are several comp plan policies that we are consistent with, including reducing vehicle miles traveled through a mixed-use development. That's what we are doing here with the CX and RX designations, having those uses close together to reduce vehicle miles traveled, improving housing variety and zoning for housing, nods to open space through nodal development, and the green stormwater commitments. So again, this request, while inconsistent with the current future land use map and certain comprehensive plan policies, it is forward-looking to be consistent with the CESA recommendations and to better accommodate the future growth that is occurring in this area and will continue to occur with the I-540 extension nearby. It will do so in a way that allows for mixed-use development with a variety of permitted housing choices in a increased density in close proximity to potential commercial uses, which would reduce the vehicle miles traveled and the negative impacts of sprawl that would result from low-density residential development under the current entitlements or under the low-scale residential flume. So for these reasons, we respectfully request that you recommend approval of this case, and we are happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Thank you. Just want to check in and see if there are any members of the public who wish to speak on this item. Seeing none, I'll go on to questions and comments from commissioners. And if there are no questions or comments, it's fairly straightforward. Then we can move right into a motion. Commissioner Lampman?
I'll make a motion. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated October 11, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the 2030 comprehensive plan and the future land use map to the extent in the adopted consistency statement. This is for case number Z222 on Rock Quarry Road. The Planning Commission also recommends amendment to the relevant comprehensive plan policies as subject property only, and in addition, only if the property is developed in accordance with the approved ordinance, and to the future land use map as the subject property only from low-scale residential to community mixed-use, medium-scale residential.
Thank you, Commissioner Lampman. And do we have a second? Commissioner Dattell? Commissioner Lampman has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z222. Commissioner Dattell has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in support and those opposed, that motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.5, that is case Z5322. This is a city-initiated request to rezone city-owned property on South Wilmington Street, Summit Ave, and Waterworks Street from residential 6 to residential mixed-use 4 stories urban limited and residential mixed-use 5 stories urban limited for the purposes of affordable housing. The request was discussed at the September 22nd Committee of the Whole meeting and was voted out of the committee with a recommendation for denial at a 4-3 vote. I will open up to see if any commissioners have any questions or comments. Commissioner Lampman?
I just have one amendment to your statement. I don't think that the city can make the requirement that it's for affordable housing, so are we able to state that, or is it just a rezoning to?
That's just the intent is.
Okay.
I have one comment. This maybe should have waited to the end on the minutes, but just wanted to reflect the minutes say that the final vote was unanimous, 7-0, and I believe it was not unanimous. The final vote was 4-3 recommending denial. And the members opposed were myself, Chair Fox, and was it Commissioner Otwell? Is that correct?
Washington, this is Washington Street.
This is the Wilmington, the affordable housing along the Dix Edge.
I thought I was in favor of that.
In favor of that, yes, that was those in favor.
We can double check our notes to make sure.
Okay, that's what I have in my notes as well. And so and just in case I'm not here at the end, and with that edit, just as part of the committee report, I'll note there were major concerns by members of the public and all of the commissioners with respect to the stormwater issues and the feasibility and many others. However, upon further inquiry with staff, we determined that currently there are, the property could be developed today as R6 with affordable housing placed on it today. And also that with respect to we couldn't add any conditions because we, as staff, a city-initiated rezoning can't include any conditions related to stormwater. So in effect, this was merely changing the zoning on the case. It was not, there were no current protections in place with respect to stormwater, and there were no limitations today on the city's ability to put affordable housing on this issue. So while I think all of us shared major concerns about those issues, this rezoning case would not actually impact those legal entitlements the city could sell, develop, or put affordable housing on the property today. So just wanted to provide that background on why we voted the way we did despite major concerns.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Okay, go ahead. Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. I typed my comments for this one because they are significant, and I've mentioned before a few times that occasionally we have cases that I lose sleep over, and this is one. So bear with me. This one's kind of personal for me, so just bear with me as I give my comments. The city's equity statement says the city of Raleigh is committed to establishing and advancing an equitable community for all. Because we know that race is the primary predictor of a person's outcomes across all social indicators and societal systems, the city of Raleigh will prioritize racial equity to dismantle the policies and systems that have created and sustained these inequities. We all understand how critical the need is for affordable housing in Raleigh right now. Generally, I'm excited when I see a case come before us for affordable housing because we see them so infrequently. This one wasn't one of those cases, though. It made me sad and angry. It reminded me of planning's not so stellar legacy of creating policy and zoning that directly led to inequity and dehumanization of those who have the least say in decisions that affect their quality of life. I'm certainly not implying that this was the intent of this case. I appreciate that the city initiated this rezoning to provide affordable housing in an area where it is rapidly disappearing. I understand the challenges of providing affordable housing, and I know we aren't going to make a meaningful impact on creating affordable housing without city investment, so I do appreciate the effort here. I also understand that the community wants to see affordable housing retained in this area, emphasis on retained. That doesn't mean displace people from decent, naturally occurring affordable housing and then banish them to a site in a less desirable area. I also fully understand that I'm just a planning commissioner. I'm just being asked to determine if a map amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan. But part of my charge is also to determine if it's in the best interest of the public, and that's why I can't remain silent on this case. And I want my comments on the record so they don't get misconstrued or spun to fit someone else's narrative. I am not comfortable recommending approval of a rezoning for affordable housing at all costs. I'm not willing to say let's house people on land that hasn't ever been developed because no one else wants to live there. I'm not willing to place people near environmental hazards simply because they have limited resources. They still have dignity and don't deserve to be relegated to places you and I wouldn't want to live. Let me be very clear. I believe, and I have a 27-year career as a planner focused on equity and environmental justice, that building housing specifically designated for low-income and very low-income persons, who we all know are disproportionately persons of color, in an area near environmental hazards is an environmental justice violation. If we want affordable housing in South Raleigh, let's do more to keep people in the affordable housing they're already living in. Let's do more to incentivize developers to include affordable housing in the luxury developments we continue to approve that are forcing people out of their affordable homes. Let's be creative like we're being with the North Hills rezoning. But let's not say to our citizens that the best we can do is take you out of your home that you're currently living in and toss you into a development adjacent to a floodplain and other environmental hazards. Let's not do that. Let's care for the least of these, just as we would want others to care for us. I cannot, in good conscience or in adherence to my ethics as a professional planner, support this rezoning.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Ms. Recco, can you pull up slides 3 through 5 so we can look a little bit at the extent of coverage of floodplain area? Okay. Is that, what portion of Site 1 is unbuildable? Or is the majority of Site 1 buildable?
So the portions you see with the designation here, and then you can see the topo lines, the steep slopes. So it would really be the western part of the site that has the flatter topography.
Okay. Is that Site 2 in the bottom right of that slide? I'm not quite. Okay. Is there any floodplain on Site 2?
No, I don't believe there is.
Okay. Procedural question. Could we split these 3 parcels and recommend approval or denial on a site-by-site basis? Okay?
Sure.
Okay. You're going to have to bear with me because I'm going to be flying blind. Okay. So I would like to recommend approval of Site 1 and Site 2 included in the rezoning Z5322 as it is reasonable and in the public interest, and to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated October 11, 2022, contained in the agenda materials as amended at the table here. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement. So that is a recommendation for approval of Site 1 and Site 2, the majority of which are not included in a floodplain area. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So I have recommended approval of the 2 sites, Site 1 and Site 2. Vice Chair Miller has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion?
Is there going to be a separate motion then?
Yes,
to
there will
deny?
be.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I just looked at the map again. Is Site 3 in a floodplain?
Yes, the pink portion there is in the floodway fringe.
Correct. So the motion was for Site 1 and Site 2? To get approved?
Okay, I'm sorry, you're thinking about it.
Okay. So recommending approval of Site 1 and Site 2, part of the zoning case Z5322, seconded by Vice Chair Miller. By show of hands, those in support? Go ahead.
But is Site 1, the developable area is adjacent to the floodplain, correct?
Correct, yeah, it's separated by the steep
It's like
slope.
60% of the site is floodplain.
About 35-40% is buildable.
Do you want me to peel them apart further? This one I actually saw as an amenity, a Greenway-oriented development.
But if the 60% floods, what happens to the 40%? The water's not going to stop because it
Well,
recognizes
I believe the
the
nature of the
floodplain boundary.
topography, the flooded areas are on the low side and also include other parcels, and the high side would be where it would be buildable. Okay, go ahead.
I think, I apologize. I was, at the beginning, I thought you were talking about sites 2 and site 3. And I kind of agree. I agree with the notion that perhaps, a significant portion of site 1 is buildable. But I think its proximity to the creek makes it kind of more environmentally sensitive than other areas.
So we have a motion on the table, and it's acceptable to vote in denial and then propose another motion. So let's go ahead and do that. So by show of hands, any in support? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those opposed? 3. That motion passes 5-3. Did anyone want to make a motion in relation to site number 3? I'm more than willing to do so, as you all stare at me. Okay. I'm going to recommend denial of Site 3 as articulated in case Z5322.
If I could get you, and I didn't catch you on the first one, adoption of the recommended, or adoption of the consistency statement needs to be included with your motions.
Correct. I was about to read it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. I'm not fast enough. I did in the first one.
My bad.
That's okay. Okay. So this is a motion to recommend denial of Site 3 and Z5322, and I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated October 11, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend denial of the zoning amendment. Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion to deny Site 3? Okay, by show of hands, those in support. And this is support for the denial of that case. And those opposed, that motion passes unanimously.
Before we move on, may I ask a quick question of staff? So while I do support a map change currently for those 2 parcels, the concern about actual future development on the parcels is one that I think we all take pretty seriously still. What will the process look like for the city to decide whether to actually develop this? Is that a council decision or to sell it?
That's a city council decision to decide whether or not we want to ask for a request for proposal or just dispose the property. There are certain ways that we can dispose of property, and we would follow state statutes to do that.
And that would also include the terms of the RFP and those.
That's correct. Yep.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, moving on to old business. There are 5 items listed under old business today. These items have been previously discussed, and we have received presentations and heard from the public. So we will begin with a short update from staff focusing on the revisions to the request. Without objection, I'm going to reorder the items to allow associated cases to be heard together. That includes TCZ 2822, which is associated with rezoning case Z2722, and TCZ 3322, which is associated with rezoning case Z3222. So starting off with item E.1, which is case TCZ 2822, and item E.4, which is case Z2722 on Forestville Road. We will start with a staff update from Mr. Ira Mabel.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, everybody. So again, there are two sort of partner cases here, 28 and 27. So I'll start with 28, which is the text change. So just the short story is there has been no change to this request since the last time you heard this in September. There has been to the other one, but I will just remind you of the state of this case. So this is the currently zoned RX3. Although the map says CX3, so there's a typo on this page. In any event, zone for commercial uses today. So the mix is, or the changes to the case as described in the staff report. There is a change to the commercial uses allowed from the old version, the pre-UDO zoning code, and other changes to sort of the composition of buildings on the site, and does prohibit stacked apartment units. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. However, the staff report, the staff analysis is recommending a change to the future land use map. So currently you see the bulk of this site is neighborhood mixed use, but for this sort of small tab at the southern end that is moderate scale residential. So the staff recommendation is to amend the map to make the whole thing consistent, because the zoning wouldn't apply to the entire parcel. However, to confuse you further, the staff report says that in a couple places. The consistency statement neglected to add that language. So should you agree with staff and want to recommend that, I have a sentence here for someone else to say out loud. And again, I'll be happy to go back to this later if that is confusing. If it would be beneficial, I can jump to the other one so you can consider everything together, or we can stop here.
That would be great, please.
Okay. So this is the other case adjacent. You can see the CX portion just to the north there, was just the one I just talked about. And this one has changed. So again, it's sort of the same map, but just to the south a little bit. So there are two conditions that remain. So a limit on residential units to 204, and the same prohibition on stacked apartment units. There was one condition that said only residential uses shall apply here, and that was causing some issues. So instead, they are prohibiting certain uses. Basically, all of the commercial uses allowed in RX, but does allow for the minor utility and civic and other things that are non-residential, but not commercial. This one is consistent with everything. So no extra steps required. I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can about either of these.
Thank you, Mr. Mabel. Do we have any questions or comments from commissioners on either TCZ 2822 or Z2722?
The conditions for the second one, and I can't pull the numbers out of my head right away, but that would the southern site would prohibit any commercial retail uses in addition to ACUs currently permitted or being worked on by the city. I guess we have a current policy and they're working on updating it.
I'm not as familiar with the accessory commercial unit, so it does prohibit retail sales, just the last one here. So in effect, in that, an accessory commercial unit would be classified as retail sales. That would also be prohibited. There may be some nuance to that language in the UDO that I'm not super familiar with that might allow them. That's sort of a Travis or David question, I think.
Okay.
My guess is they would be retail sales if they are retail, right. Or eating establishment or what have you.
Was that a request for Travis or Mr.
Just
York?
if that answer was unsatisfactory. Okay, great.
That was satisfactory? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I believe we have to vote on the items separately. So I'm going to look first at TCZ 2822 on Buffalo Road. There are no revisions to this particular case since we've last seen it. So I'd like to entertain a motion. Okay, Commissioner Rains?
For zoning case Z2722, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated October 11th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
And do we have a second? Commissioner Dautel? Commissioner Rains has offered a motion to recommend approval of TCZ 2822. Commissioner Dautel has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion?
He actually said Z27.
I apologize.
You said
Thank you,
Z27. You
Mr.
did.
York. I meant to say TCZ 2822.
Well, I meant to hear it correctly, but apparently I didn't. So again, that is a motion to recommend approval of TCZ 2822. With a second by Commissioner Dautel. Any additional discussion or debate at this point? Okay. By show of hands, those in favor? And those opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Now on to Z2722. So again, the new zoning conditions would prohibit still most non-residential uses while still allowing for the minor utility use. Is there any additional questions or comments on Z2722 before I request a motion? I'd like to entertain a motion then. Commissioner Dautel?
Thanks, Chair Fox. For Z2722, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated October 11, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. The action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because the request would allow for additional housing supply and housing types.
Excellent. And do we have a second? Commissioner Rains, because you travel in a pair. That is Commissioner Dautel's recommended a motion for approval for Z2722. Commissioner Rains has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in support? And any opposed?
I'll make a comment too. I don't think
Go
it's
right ahead.
appropriate to remove commercial from the neighborhood uses.
So that motion passes 7-1. And the issue with the approval is removing commercial uses. All right, moving on to item E.2 and E.5, which are related. This is case TCZ 3322 on North Hills Drive and case Z3222 on Millbrook Road. We will start with an update from Ira Mabel.
Sure, thank you very much. So once again, there's a change to one of these, but not to the other, so we will move forward and I'll try to be as clear as possible. So there is the new zoning case, which is the one on the left side of the screen, bisected by Millbrook Road, and the text change rezoning, which is further north on North Hills Drive. And just to be clear, which one is which? So the text change to rezoning is the same as you heard last time. These strike-throughs are the text change, so the difference between the zoning that is there today and what is requested, but there has been no change since September. So again, just a refresher, this is really just doing two things. One is lowering the maximum number of dwelling units from 112 to 97, and then striking through that reference to property, which would no longer be in this district. Sorry, should the requests be approved. So other things remaining, I can go back if there are still questions about what is the state of this case. The Z case, the straight rezoning case on Millbrook Road has changed. So there was a prohibition on uses that included daycare, personal service, and retail. That has been removed, so now those would be allowed. So you could have a daycare, personal service, or retail. But for two personal service subcategories, which will remain on that list. And then other than that, the other two zoning conditions are from last time, so cap on dwelling units of 25 and tree preservation on the south side of the Millbrook. This is consistent with the comp plan and future land use map mostly, but we are recommending a change from public arts and open space to moderate scale. And again, I did that in one set of slides, but we need two motions like last time, which should all be in your backup.
Thank you, Mr. Mabel. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, we'll start with a motion for TCZ 3322.
I do have a quick question.
Oh, go ahead.
What's the rub with optometrists?
That's the question for the applicant, I believe.
Okay. Had nothing in particular, just
that was the condition they submitted.
Okay.
There was no comment from staff either way about what they should or shouldn't
All right.
include. I believe the applicant is here if you'd like to ask.
I was just wondering if there's like some kind of chemicals they use or something that. Okay.
I don't know.
I don't mind that as a condition on this rezoning case. So with that, I'll make a motion. I move to approve TCZ 3322. Motion to approve that case and to adopt the proposed consistency statement included in today's agenda materials.
And do we have a second? Vice Chair Miller has offered a motion to recommend approval of TCZ 3322. Commissioner Rains has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? And those opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. And then I'll also move to approve case Z3222 and to adopt the proposed consistency statement included in today's materials.
And do we have a second? Commissioner Rains? Again, Vice Chair Miller has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z3222. Commissioner Rains has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in support? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Now moving on to item E.3, which is case Z1022 on Ratchford Drive. This is a request to rezone approximately 5.94 acres from industrial mixed-use 3 stories with special highway overlay District 2 to commercial mixed-use 20 stories conditional use. We heard this item at our September 27th meeting where we discussed concerns regarding the Greenway-related conditions. The applicant has provided new conditions to address these concerns. We'll start with an update from Don Belk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indeed, revised conditions were submitted on September 30th, and site perspective review from the last presentation. Note the separated trail on the street and the current street view of the site. It was discussed at the last meeting, too, regarding the relocation of the Greenway, the previous section, what had been abandoned due to persistent flooding issues. Just to summarize the new conditions, conditions 1 through 5 are the same as you saw previously. Condition 6 has changed a bit. Note 6B specifies or limits the number of parking spaces to a maximum of 20 per occupied building. And also there is a change in the wording to require a pedestrian connection between each occupied building and the sidewalk within the right-of-way of Ratchford. Comparison here between existing and proposed, no changes here. No changes to the transportation and energy analysis. It is served by Go Raleigh Route 1. I believe the difficulty in accessing that transit stop was pointed out at the last meeting, but it is within distance. Affordability analysis does not change. Demographic indicators as reported previously. Land use history. Note that this request would allow standalone commercial uses that are inconsistent with the higher scale residential designation of this site, and also the proposed maximum height is taller than is recommended. And note the conditions and restrictions on parking and placement of buildings to emulate a frontage along a transit emphasis corridor. The proposal is inconsistent with the flume. It is consistent with the urban form map, city growth center and frequent transit area. Note these consistent policies. These have not changed since the last presentation, and the inconsistent policies also. There are no outstanding issues, and your deadline for action is November 26th. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Due to the nature of some of the changes, I'm going to request that the applicant is available, we can give some additional time to the applicant, a total of 6 minutes. And then I'll also check in if there are members of the public who wish to speak on this item, Z1022. One? Okay. All right, after Mr. Birch is finished.
Great. Good morning, Madam Chair, Michael Birch and Commission. Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners. Also with me this morning is Ms. Ann Stoddard with Grubb Ventures. So at the last meeting, comments were focused on providing some greater certainty about kind of what would happen between the building and the road with regard to parking, primarily focused on ensuring a safe, convenient pedestrian connections from the buildings to the sidewalk. So to that end, we limited the amount of parking that could occur within that area between the building and the street to no more than 20 per occupied building. That's still limited to handicap, ride share, et cetera. But we also included a condition that requires that each building have at least one pedestrian connection from the building to the sidewalk that does not traverse a drive aisle or a parking area. So again, each building will have a connection out to the street where pedestrians do not have to cross any vehicular surface area. The other item that we were asked to look at was incorporating the Greenway into the site. And so I want to address why we were not able to do that. From a code standpoint, I just want to remind the Commission that the UDO cross-section requires both a sidewalk and a bike lane above the curb. So that would be required to be developed just under the UDO. But essentially this boils down to incorporating the Greenway into the site is really a site plan issue because of all the different impacts to the site that it could have, plus some other items that I wanted to touch on. So essentially, incorporating the Greenway along the frontage here would alter the street cross-section. But at the zoning stage, we're not able to kind of build in a design alternate that would speak to and limit the impact of having to incorporate additional bike lane width, et cetera, on our side of the street. That's compounded by the fact that Parks is still requesting a 100-foot wide easement on the backside of the site along Crabtree Creek. Even though they may not maintain a facility there, they still want a 100-foot easement that really comes up to the back of this building here. So as you can see, that impacts developable portions of the property. Additionally, the Greenway, or kind of the facility that's currently in the street right now comes into the street off-site. And so we don't control kind of the entire frontage along Ratchford. And so there could be a situation where there's an inconsistent facility along Ratchford. Additionally, and this is maybe trying to make it a little more clear here, we have to dedicate Ratchford here, and at some point the Greenway has to get on the other side of the street to then circle around and go under. And we can't at the zoning stage say exactly where that crossing is going to be. And so it's hard for us to add a zoning condition that says we'll provide, a Greenway facility behind the curb for our entire frontage. I'll note that the Parks and Recs comments also still note that they may want in the future, long-term, to have a facility along the creek. So we didn't want to commit to something, requiring something along Ratchford that long-term may not be the plan, temporarily may not be the plan. And I'll note that in the staff report, the Parks and Recs comments expressly state that there's no recommended mitigation at the rezoning stage, kind of recognizing that there's going to need to be coordination between this applicant, Parks and Rec staff, transportation staff at the site plan stage. And I'll note that the applicant here, Grub Ventures, has a demonstrated history of working closely with Parks and Rec and transportation staff on enhanced Greenway connectivity, Greenway amenities, the Glenwood Place development along Crabtree Creek, as well as one of their projects off of Lake Boone Trail along House Creek, where they worked to bring the Greenway into the site, provide enhanced connectivity. And so we are essentially asking that in lieu of, adding a condition which right now, is speaking to something very uncertain, we fully intend to work with transportation and Parks and Rec staff at the site plan stage to figure out what the best solution is. So with that, I'll just also remind the Planning Commission that in terms of access to the transit, the Capitol Boulevard route, that the DOT project, the bridge replacement project, will include sidewalks. So that will provide that connectivity to those bus stops. So we are consistent with the comp plan urban form map, reasonable and in the public interest, because we're trying to provide additional housing opportunities in proximity to transit, along major transportation infrastructure, and in proximity to employment areas, and really facilitate redevelopment of a gateway site from a used car sales lot to a much more urban, pedestrian-friendly mixed-use development. So here to address any questions the commission may have.
Thank you, sir. Seeing that there are no members of the public, there is one. I apologize. Go right ahead. We have a total of 2 minutes on the clock.
Good morning again. I like the project in terms of its sort of audacity at a major intersection and in the area. And I'm glad to hear of the reputation for working with Parks and Greenway. I think that's really, for me, what this is all about. Excuse me. Two things. One, what I'm trying to have the commission consider is a little step back from the ordinary policies that impact the Greenway part of this, whether it be along the creek or within the street. And when you look at these policies, to begin to give a little greater emphasis to the idea that the street, when connecting separate parts of the Greenway, needs to mimic the Greenway. That's the best word I can come up with, in terms of giving pedestrian access and comfort. When you come out of the Greenway heading west, as it passes through the tunnel on the highway, the road there, for just a moment you think, wow, the Greenway hasn't ended, even though I'm getting into a commercial residential area. And then it breaks. And that's not exactly in this area yet, but it does offer the same potential solution that might be applicable here. And I give this just as an example. If the roadway, including the Greenway path and the sidewalk adjacent, were more like an alley or a strollway or one of those things where you tell the pedestrian, we think you'll be enjoying the entire experience more if it's not interrupted like this. Thank you very much.
I appreciate your comments. I do want to let you know we also did read your email, so thank you very much.
I have a hearing disability, so I hear about half of what you say, but I'm always glad to be doing all the talking. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Right. Do we have any questions or comments from commissioners?
I have a couple comments for staff, if you don't mind. This might be for transportation or parks folks if we have anyone here, but how is the current Greenway Trail provisioned on the street? Is there an easement? Is it like a formal agreement? What allows it to exist in the street as a parks facility on a transportation piece of infrastructure?
Hi, good morning. Can you repeat your question, please?
Certainly. Right now, the Greenway Trail comes up onto Ratchford Drive and exists in the road. And I was wondering what kind of policy or what arrangement allows it to be there? Does an easement? It's not a parks easement, I wouldn't think. What kind of agreement allows it to exist there?
I can't speak specifically towards any of the park policies that are there, but from my understanding at the site plan stage, we can definitely work, the development review team can work with the developer to get some easements on the site for those connections.
Okay. I was also going to ask if the development goes through and it's a large redevelopment, it's a 2-lane undivided street section. Would we be able to guarantee that there would be room in the street to place back the Greenway Trail the way it is now? Or would we need to dedicate that space to accommodate for the increase in traffic?
I can't speak specifically to the amount of width that we would need for this connection. That would be looked at more closely at the site plan stage. And as far as the traffic analysis, we did study it with the current designation, the 2-lane undivided, but it didn't go into depth as to right-of-way constraints and all that stuff.
Okay, so that staff would diligently work to place it back, but there's not a guarantee that the street section would allow for a 2-way Greenway path in the road as it currently exists.
Yes, as it's studied, there's no specific outline because there hasn't been.
Right.
Commissioner Otwell, I'm going to tag on to your question too. Was I hearing correctly per code at the time of site plan development, the greenway and sidewalk would be required above the curb?
So the street cross section for this street would require both a sidewalk as well as a bike lane above the curb. One-way, yeah. So a 6-foot sidewalk, 5-foot bike lane. Want to just address a couple of the questions that Mr. Otwell had. First, the Greenway facility is in the right-of-way. That's a city right-of-way. And so the city departments can work together on placing, they've kind of got the right to place what they want to place within that right-of-way. That's why you've seen some of these streets being restriped, going from 4 lanes to 2 lanes with dedicated, separate bike lanes, like on Cameron Street in Village District. I would also say there was another question about, I forgot your other question. Do you remember it, the second one?
The question was the difference between the easements and the right-of-ways that allows the Greenway, which normally exists like on a Greenway easement, like a parks easement. The other one was, would we be relatively certain that if we get a sidewalk and a one-way bike lane, that we could fit a Greenway back in the road as it's a 2-lane avenue, and it'll be built to a certain width. And then if the city decides to come back and reestablish the Greenway Trail, the lane requirements and the traffic and turning requirements might prohibit that kind of use in the road.
So I'll just speak to what the current cross-section is, and as you can see, I mean, Ratchford is, we're going to be constructing a new section of Ratchford, but also I don't necessarily think all of this is, there probably needs some additional improvements along the existing section of Ratchford, but the back-to-back section for this type of street is 27 feet. Travel lanes, can be as narrow as, 11 feet, which allows for an additional 5 feet for some separation. But the right-of-way is fairly large. I believe it's 67 feet. And so that will require a good amount of dedication on our site along Ratchford. And again, at the site plan stage, we have the ability to work with Parks and Transportation to modify the standard section. So maybe instead of a 6-foot grass strip, then a 5-foot sidewalk, then a 5-foot bike lane, maybe we can reduce the grass strip. We can increase the width of the bike lane to accommodate a 2-way bike lane there, or just one wide facility where it's more of a greenway, multi-use path that accommodates both walking and biking in 2 directions. But we don't have the ability at the rezoning stage to commit to that, because all of that will require kind of a, working with staff and then a design alternate in all likelihood at the site plan stage.
I'm sorry, while you're there, you mentioned Ratchford and that you plan to push it on through. I think in the staff report, it mentioned that the construction of that cut through wouldn't be guaranteed unless there was a condition offered to share reimbursement, and I don't think that was included in the condition. Is there a plan to connect that through? What's the status of that?
Yep. So when I was referring to construction of Ratchford, we're obligated to construct Ratchford along our frontage, and then kind of to the point here where this property line meets the right-of-way. So we've got dedication and construction of Ratchford for that length. At the last meeting, we talked about why we were not adding a condition obligating the applicant to construct the off-site portion. We said that there is still the opportunity for a public-private partnership for that, but both the TIA was run without the connection, and we maintain acceptable levels of service at all our studied intersections without that connection. And so we did not want to add a condition that essentially undercuts our position to negotiate a public-private partnership for a bridge that is not necessary to mitigate a traffic impact. So.
Additional questions, Commissioner O'Haver?
So I've been a little bit reticent just because I missed the last meeting, and so catching up on a lot of this stuff. But I'm just looking at IMAPs. I guess this is a question for staff. Why couldn't the Greenway Trail move to the east of Ratchford? Why does it have to be in the street or on the applicant's parcel? There's a significant portion of land to the east there that the topo looks similar to the edge of the site. And so what's stopping the Greenway Trail? Not even talking about who pays for it yet, but why can't the Greenway Trail move to the east of Ratchford?
So I'm unfamiliar with the history of it. I do know that initially we wanted the Greenway path to be behind the site, but due to flooding, it was not a short term. It wasn't in best interest to keep that pathway there. And if I'm understanding correctly, are you talking about the area?
Correct.
Like within here?
Correct. I understand the applicant's position about not understanding being far enough along in the development of their site. I think the applicant's been clear, and I think staff surely wants to make that connection, and it looks like there's an ability to do that without too much concern. So I'm just curious why it wasn't considered there.
Yeah.
I believe it's DOT right away. Is that what we're discussing? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And it would force you to cross Ratchford twice.
Yeah. But there is an opportunity through a design adjustment, I think Mr. Birch said, for the applicant to work with staff, maybe it's an asymmetrical cross-section to increase that side of the Greenway.
Okay.
That's right. And that's just NCDOT, and you do have to get on the east side of Ratchford at some point because that's where the connection is to get back onto the creek. So where you make that crossing, is up for discussion as well in the future. Thanks.
Any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Oh, pulled up the wrong one. Hold on one second. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated October 11, 2022, containing the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Haver. And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Commissioner O'Haver has offered a recommendation for approval for Z1022. Vice Chair Miller has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes 7-1. Commissioner Otwell, did you want to take the opportunity?
Sure. Without a provision to ensure the continuity of the Greenway Trail through the site, the dramatic increase in entitlement threatens the continuity of the Greenway Trail through a tricky and sensitive corridor.
All right, thank you all. We are going to move on to new business. I'm just going to do a time check. It is 10:57. It is unlikely that we will get through all 4 cases by noon. I believe we lose a quorum at 12:10. So we will discuss what will happen to any cases that we don't address today as we get farther in the agenda. So these 4 items on the new business agenda today have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, so we will hear a full staff presentation and an applicant presentation. The first of which is item F.1, which is case Z8821 on Colby Drive, Wake Forest Road, and Hardemont Street. This is a request to rezone approximately 27.8 acres from residential mixed-use 3 stories and conservation management to residential mixed-use 5 stories conditional use. Conditions approximate the urban limited frontage along Bland Road, approximate the parking limited frontage along Wake Forest Road, and cap building height at 3 stories within 150 feet of adjacent residential districts. And also provide additional notice to tenants for termination of lease. Among other conditions described in the backup materials. We'll start with a staff presentation from Hannah Reckow.
Good morning. So this request is a request to rezone just under 28 acres, 3 parcels, as was mentioned, from RX3 and Conservation Management to RX5 CU. This is located north of downtown in sort of the Midtown area. Zoning in this area, especially along Wake Forest Road, is generally mixed use. And then zoning to the west is generally residential. So again, just to situate ourselves, this is north of the interchange with I-440, north of Duke Health and other related office buildings along Wake Forest Road. And then there's other commercial and office uses along this corridor. A zoom in to the site. I apologize for the quality of that image. You can see the site has frontage on Bland Road, Hardemont Street, Colby Drive, and Wake Forest Road. Colby Drive and Hardemont Street go through the site. Here are some images of the frontage in that area. The site contains apartment buildings, so you can see that in each of these images. And there is some topography on the site, which you can see on the Colby Drive image. So a handful of zoning conditions are proposed. Conditions 1 through 3 reference the Bland Road frontage, so buildings would need to be located within 20 feet, have a building entrance facing Bland Road, and at least 50% of that frontage would be occupied by a building. And then conditions 4, 5, and 6 are relate to the Wake Forest Road frontage, so located within 100 feet of Wake Forest Road, having a building entrance, and at least 50% of that frontage would have a building in it. So as in the summary, as was mentioned in the summary, those are similar to the urban frontages and hybrid frontages requirements. And then there's a zoning condition that is limiting height to 3 stories within 100 feet of adjoining properties. Those are the properties, residential properties to the west. And then a zoning condition requiring 180 days written notice before termination of leases on the site due to redevelopment. So this is request is maintaining the base district residential mixed use. It's asking for additional 2 stories and adding some zoning conditions. So the entitlement is an increase in residential number of dwelling units. And then the general setbacks are roughly the same, but development would need to meet those conditions relating to frontage. So this site has a higher walk score than average. It's got good proximity to commercial uses, average transit and bike score compared to the city average, and lower cost of transportation and higher proximity to jobs than average. There are 2 bus lines that can serve this site, Route 2 with 30-minute service and 24L also with 30-minute service. The request would increase housing entitlement, does not include guaranteed subsidized units, but generally would allow a variety of housing types and smaller than average units, as well as is within walking distance of transit. And it's a larger site, so it's within 2 census districts, one of which has significantly high proportion of people of color and low-income populations. And then some land use history in the area. The Eastgate subdivision to the west does have historical covenants that restrict development beyond the UDO, including a minimum house size. So the site has a few designations on the future land use map. One is community mixed use at that corner with Hardemont and Bland, as well as medium scale residential, moderate scale residential, and a little strip of public parks and open space, which aligns with the current CM zoning. The request of RX5 is inconsistent with the moderate scale public parks and open space and medium scale residential for the intensity of residential development that would be permitted. So an approval of this request would amend those portions of the site to higher scale residential. A portion of the site is within a frequent transit area on the urban form map, and then Wake Forest Road is a transit emphasis corridor, and Bland Road is a main street. And so those would recommend a urban or hybrid frontage. The request includes zoning conditions that mimic some of the main features of those frontages. So the request is consistent with the urban form guidance and is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. As I mentioned, it is inconsistent with the future land use map and consistent with urban form map. Here the consistent policies, which include going beyond the buffering requirements in the UDO, allowing for a variety of housing types and additional housing, as well as area-specific guidance. The site is within the Midtown St. Albans area plan. That plan has a map included in the comprehensive plan that includes some additional height guidance. A very small portion of the site has guidance on that map, which is for a range of 5 to 7 stories. So consistent with that guidance, consistent also with policies on transition in land use from the commercial areas to residential areas. The inconsistent policies, there are 2 of them. One, we've already discussed the future land use map designations, and then density transitions, LU 5.4 specifically calls out moderate and medium scale housing as being a good transition between lower scale residential and more intensive areas, and this request would fall more under higher scale residential. So for that reason, it's not quite in line with that policy. And that concludes the overview. Your deadline for action is in December.
Thank you, Ms. Recco. Next, we will hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you. The Montecito Apartments were built between 1967 and 1969. And the Montecito West complex was built in 1971. Drucker and Falk has managed both properties for 50 years on behalf of the same owners. We do have with us today Kelly Falk from Drucker and Falk, in case we have questions for her. The second generation of that ownership family is seeking to prepare these properties for the next generation of ownership. It is making this zoning request in response to changes in the surrounding city and its need for housing since these properties were first built. These long-term owners don't have a project in the pipeline. They are seeking to understand the city's needs at this location to permit their long-term planning to continue. They've, in fact, recently completed a major investment, investing approximately $1 million in the exterior and the amenities at Montecito West, as well as continuing to work to upgrade the interiors of the units at Montecito at a cost of approximately $10,000 per unit. Like I said, that work does continue. The request that you have in front of you is truly a modest one. So the current RX3 zoning already could accommodate approximately 522 units in addition to the 356 units in place on the site today. So that's about a 147% increase in units without rezoning. By contrast, the proposed rezoning would permit only an additional 23% increase in units. So rezoning at this location would simply ensure that if redeveloped, additional housing could be provided, and in this case, the estimate is approximately 206 units. There's one other effect of the requested rezoning, which is to permit flexibility and clustering on the site. So for a quick example, the 878 units permitted now in a 3-story configuration requires a building footprint for 1/3 of those units, or 293 units. The 1,084 units that would be permitted under the requested zoning in the 5-story configuration would require enough building footprint for only 217 of those units, so 1/5 of those units, or 76 fewer units than under the existing zoning. At 1,000 square feet per apartment, that's 76,000 square feet of building footprint that would not be necessary under the rezoning, so it's about 1 3/4 acres. So this request is for a modest increase in additional density as well as flexibility in the arrangement on the site. I want to talk a little bit about the conditions that were offered. This rather large site has a unique role in linking the commercial corridors to the east with the single-family homes to the west. And in order to create that smooth transition, we've proposed conditions to address each end of the site in different ways. This map simply shows that main street along Bland Road that you saw, as well as the frequent transit area at Wake Forest Road. There's also a transit emphasis corridor on Wake Forest Road, and we've responded to these with our many conditions that apply urban frontage-like requirements along those corridors, or hybrid frontage along Wake Forest Road. Due to the size of the site and the quick transition needed to the west, we kept those requirements at the eastern end of the site rather than applying a blanket frontage all the way across the site that would be likely to have unintended consequences as you got closer and closer to the single-family residential. We did also, of course, add this condition that applies everywhere on the site, ensuring a very long notice period for tenants. And then at the western end of the site, there's a combination of protections at that border, this being the standard UDO protection of the neighborhood transition that does apply along that western border, as well as, so this is part of the standard neighborhood transitions, showing that Zone C and how the height is controlled in that second 50 feet from the parcel boundary. And our conditions add an additional restriction on height that extends 150 feet from the parcel boundary, so kind of cutting off some of that additional height as you get closer to the single-family houses. So in summary, our request represents the modest increase in density, an increase in flexibility as far as arrangement on the site, and transition from the taller, more urban development that is more likely at the eastern end of the site to the 3-story configuration at the western end here. Again, all in an effort to permit the long-term owner to continue with their long-range planning. This is an owner who's provided needed housing at this location for a very long time and seeks to continue to do so. Thank you.
Are there any members of the public here to speak on this item? Nope. Okay. I will move on to questions and comments from commissioners. Commissioner O'Haver?
I should know this, but I am curious why the conditions are required, as applicants said, that are urban frontage like. Do those not exist in the RX zoning?
Frontages are typically applied as a zoning district. And so on occasion, you might see conditions that mostly replicate frontage conditions. And that's the applicant's attempt to get closer to the policy guidance in the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I'd like to entertain a motion. Oh, Commissioner Bennett?
It's not a question, it's a comment. And this was pointed out in the staff report as well, but I just wanted to emphasize it that I am just disappointed that there is no condition about keeping any future units that are developed there affordable. The staff report does note that this is naturally occurring affordable housing, and it would be nice to see that preserved, especially in an area like Midtown where we see anything but affordable housing. So,
Thank you. Has the applicant considered adding additional conditions related to affordability?
Sure. This is a topic that has certainly come up, as you may or may not be aware. These apartments were originally constructed as brand new market rate housing. Over time, that has produced today's more affordable housing in this area with no restrictions, no requirements to do so. This was just the life cycle of the residential property. We felt that a healthy housing market will allow that process to continue, will increase supply to ensure that tenants aren't necessarily stuck in kind of designated units in small locations throughout the city, but in fact have options. So when they have those 6 months notice, are able to have other choices. I will also note there is guidance in the recently adopted Midtown Area Plan regarding affordable housing and sort of the policy that is to apply here, which is that a level of affordability at 80% for, I believe it's 10% of units for 10 years, should be provided where zoning is requested at a height of 7 stories or higher. We felt that the 5 stories was more in keeping with the area in this location as well.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments? Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Rains?
Bring it up here. Let me make sure I get the right one. For case Z8821, move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated October 11th, 2022, containing the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Commissioner Otwell? Commissioner Rains has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z8821. Commissioner Otwell has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes 7-1. Moving on to item F.2, this is case Z5522 on Johnston Street. This is a request to rezone approximately 2 acres from neighborhood mixed-use 3 stories urban limited and neighborhood mixed-use 5 stories urban limited to commercial mixed-use 12 stories urban limited conditional use. Proposed zoning conditions prohibit certain uses, limit building height, prohibit certain building materials, require certain pedestrian connections and amenities, require a certain number of parking spaces per residential unit, and applies certain restrictions within 150 feet of St. Mary's Street. I did summarize.
Great job.
I know. Without objection, Commissioner Rains is recused from this item. And we will start with a staff presentation from Ira Mabel.
Thank you very much. In addition to that summary, I will say staff has suggested a few technical revisions to conditions to improve the clarity and enforceability, but not the substance at all, and can be received by staff between your recommendation and public hearing. So really just minor stuff to get us all on the same page during site plan approval. In any event, this is the site, so it's the entire south side of Johnston Street between St. Mary's and Boylan, currently zoned neighborhood mixed use 5 stories with urban limited frontage. This is actually looking south, so flip yourselves upside down there. So you can see currently 1 to 2 story commercial buildings and some surface parking on the site. And I have labeled some named developments there to help you orient. This is a photo from the St. Mary side, photo of Gaston Street, so looking dead south at the site, and then one on the Boylan Street side. Pardon me. So one condition limiting some commercial uses permitted in CX, which does permit most of them in the CX district on its own. A total cap on all building height of 150 feet. And again, the request is for 12 stories. So some prohibition on building materials facing the facades on 2 of the streets. Pardon me. There is a requirement for the combination of the sidewalk and the planting strip on St. Mary's Street to be at least 15 feet wide, which does match one of the options in the UDO, but is slightly larger than the other one. So we would just guarantee that size for no matter which streetscape option they pick. There's requirement for half a parking space per residential unit. The requirement for the installation of a crosswalk on St. Mary Street, so specifying a location at that particular intersection where they would install a crosswalk. And then some conditions that apply just to within 150 feet of St. Mary Street. So if I can go back to an aerial, it's essentially the width of that lot there is about 150 feet. I will take the opportunity to fix that for the next person. So within that within that distance, a height of 5 stories rather than 12, and then some conditions on any newly established bar or nightclub, tavern, lounge. So there is an existing bar, the My Way Tavern, I believe. So would not apply to that should that use be maintained. But any newly established bar within that distance would have no live performances, dance floor, outdoor seating, and hours of operation. So the entitlement does increase quite a bit for certain categories, namely the office and more than doubling the number of residential units. Pretty high walk-in transit scores, pretty close to downtown and bus lines in this part of downtown. So there are a number that go up St. Mary Street and then Glenwood and Peace that I've listed there. So pretty transit accessible part of town. There was a note in the staff report in the transportation section about the 10-year bike plan. So I did have a map just for your, to make that clear. This map, I believe, has been updated recently, but the section relevant to the site has not been. So there might be some other, if you look at the newly adopted 10-year priority plan, it might look a little bit different, but this stretch on Johnston is the same. The would add to housing supply would permit the smallest units possible, within walking distance of transit. In recent memory has been commercial, so no residential units. The median rent in this part of town has been going up quite rapidly, and there was racially restricted covenants in the Forest Park neighborhood at its founding. So we do the search for those things, but none found for the site itself. The request is inconsistent with the higher scale residential. So this is a not often seen category, but does not envision commercial uses really, just much taller multifamily. So the height and residential use would not be inconsistent, but the CX does permit a lot of commercial. And the frontage is consistent with the downtown urban form map, and it is consistent with the comp plan overall. So staff is recommending a change to part of the site to community mixed use from that higher residential. So the office, given the height restrictions and the use restrictions, I think consistent with the office and residential portion of the flume, but not the higher scale residential part. So consistent with policies about commercial impacts, transition, walkability, frontage, the downtown policies that are relevant for about edges and transitions, inconsistent with that flume policy, and also a couple of policies about the urban pattern. So again, it's not too many. There is one 12-story building, Raleigh Housing Authority building on a block to the east, but most of the development in this immediate area, especially on the Forest Park side, would be very different than that. And LU 5.7 has a very specific wording, which this does not follow. So other than the technical corrections, which again are not about any of the substance of the conditions, I'd be happy to answer any other questions before you hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Mabel. Next, we're going to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. I'm Jamie Schwedler with Parker Poe here on behalf of the applicant, Stevens Enterprises. With me today is Matt Stevens, as well as our development team who's available to answer any questions. Ira did a great job of summarizing this request, which is a little bit of an unusual parcel, both in its shape, its size, and its designation on the comprehensive plan. So as you can see highlighted there, we're surrounded by many apartments, but most of those were built under the former version of the code that had different restrictions or calculations on height. And I'll kind of explain that as we go through. The Glenwood Towers development is immediately to our east, and then directly off the screen to screen right are two additional 40-story zonings that were approved here in recent years. So the area has changed significantly in the last 4 years, and since that height measurement has changed. But we have a 1.5 acre assemblage between Johnston and St. Mary's Street and Boylan, surrounded by kind of a mixture that's developed over time that makes the existing zoning no longer appropriate to accommodate the growth that's needed in this area. And so we looked at that zoning, the mix of the NX district with the different height designations, as well as the future land use guidance, and felt that given the 12 stories that you see immediately to the east and kind of catty corner to the north, the 40-story zonings that have been approved recently, that a 12-story designation with CX to allow this kind of ground floor activated uses, but additional residential or office space above was the right category. Now, to do that, we adopted the CX district, but stripped out a lot of the types of uses that would be inconsistent with the NX district, and then responded to a lot of requests from the neighbors with whom we've been meeting throughout the case to bring this more in line with NX, where it's adjacent to the Forest Park neighborhood. The future land use map is a little unusual here. We have a split designation that would indicate office immediately adjacent to the Forest Park neighborhood to our west, and then this higher scale residential. As Ira mentioned, there's not a lot of these in the city, and what it does is basically support the height, the 12-story height that we're talking about here, the use of potential residential use, but would do away with some of the commercial uses that already exist in the area. There are existing commercial tenants on the ground floor, as well as the My Way Tavern throughout Johnston Street. Those tenants will remain in place and have existing leases that will be honored. And so we're trying to do something that would just put additional density on top of those, but allow the commercial use to exist. The urban format, there is consistency there, as well as some of the designations for urban frontages, because this is a high-frequency transit area, an area the city envisions additional density and walkability, high transit and walkability scores. And so what we're dealing with is a support in terms of the 12-story and mix of uses, but how those transition into the neighborhood. Some of the recently approved cases are here, our cases to the left of the screen, and you can see the DX12 rezoning was adopted catty corner to us. Immediately south is that Glenwood Towers 12-story existing development, and then two 40-story cases just across the street on Glenwood South in the heart of this commercial district. Just south of this screen, 2 blocks south, were two additional 20-story cases that council approved this month. So this area is changing significantly. We're trying to respond to that, but provide reasonable transitions. This slide shows the context from St. Mary's, Johnson Street, looking with your back, I guess, towards St. Mary's, towards the 12-foot Glenwood Towers there in the distance. And you can see that even though that this is considered a 12-story building, it's about 55 feet. Again, some of these developments were done under the old code. And so what we have is not only a kind of an area of a bowl here on our site where the height slopes up to the north and to the south on St. Mary Street, but adjacent developments that are quite tall. This one is 5 stories and 72 feet, standing in the middle there of West Johnson Street. So we're surrounded by a good many residential developments that have significant height and over the 3-story designation that would be suggested otherwise on this corner of St. Mary's and Johnson. What we're looking at now is standing in St. Mary's and looking to the north on the left of the screen, looking to the south on the right of the screen. You can see how the street slopes up in both directions. So even though we have a 5-story designation on this part of the site, it will really be consistent with some of those other buildings and the heights that they're dealing with, because those are already sloping up in topography. And this shows just a plan view of those different stories, kind of in the center, the northwest corner of our site is kind of the lower point, and then again, it's sloping up in both directions. So the 5-story designation is actually consistent when you look at the type of development that's gone on around it, and of course, in other areas, closer to 72 feet. Through our community engagement, we've had a lot of interaction with the Forest Park community, and that's really how we developed Condition 7 that dealt with this 150-foot setback from St. Mary Street with a lot of additional restrictions in that location. The primary one being the 150-foot setback and a limitation of 5 stories. They also expressed concern about overnight parking and folks kind of walking through their neighborhood, so wanted us to commit to a minimal residential parking commitment if residential use was included. They wanted to have we initially prohibited breweries and wineries and distilleries within the 150 feet. They wanted that to remain. They wanted a commitment to the pedestrian experience, and so we did a safety study, and committed to a pedestrian crosswalk in the area that they expressed concern. And again, adding not only the 5-story and 12-story restrictions, but adding a feet limitation in height. So the 5-story portion would be limited to 80 feet, and the 12-story portion limited to 150 feet, excuse me. That matches the prior code's limitation on feet. There's not a current limitation, but again, we're trying to match what's in the area. The additional comments we received dealt with some existing uses that have caused somewhat of a noise issue in the neighborhood, hookah cafes, dealing with how to be consistent with the existing architecture in the area. And so that's how all of these commitments you see on the screen have related to incorporating those responses. One of the things that changed during the course of the case is that we talked a lot about if there were to be a parking garage, it would most likely be on the kind of that fatter portion of the site because the thinner portion is very thin. And we talked about the text change that was coming through and has now been adopted by the city. So because that applies, it will apply in a way that will meet that protection. We haven't added an additional parking deck screening like you have in recent cases because the text change is now effective and certainly would be in place before we were able to come up with a site plan. And so the summary of the conditions are a result of that significant community outreach and engagement. We've had multiple discussions with the Forest Park community. I know they're here today and we'll probably talk about some of those discussions. We've already incorporated a lot of those requests into the zoning case intentionally so that we could meet those transition requests and provide some certainty with the development. But we understand that there's still some concerns in terms of transitions, and I think that's a product of the type of designation on this parcel and its shape and size. This is a condition diagram that kind of really illustrates where we're talking about that 150-foot area. So the area in pink you see there is a 5-story limit with 80 feet limitation maximum. The limits on the bars and hookah cafes, the limits on the hours of operation, all would apply in this area as a direct response to the feedback that we heard from neighbors concerned about noise. The crosswalk in yellow is due again to that concern of folks coming from the Glenwood area through West Johnston into the neighborhood and folks using that area. There's not an existing crosswalk in place, and so we would add that commitment. And as well as a 15-foot planting or sidewalk streetscape combination. We talked a little bit about that at the meetings. We're trying to leave that a little bit flexible just to respond to the request for additional planting, but also balancing that with the additional sidewalk needed to facilitate the pedestrian experience in this area and make sure people are staying off of the streets. And then the area you see in blue would be limited to the 12-story designation. The purple line is the required parking deck screening as the text change would apply to this case as we understand it. So again, it wraps up that concern. And with that, the case was found by staff to be consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. The density and the height transitions, I think, are accommodated with that 150-foot setback in terms of how that responds to the Forest Park community and how we respond to the downtown edge. Both of the downtown plan consistency statements for the edge area and the transition area were found consistent with this request. So I'm happy to answer any questions as well as the team.
Well done. Thank you, Ms. Schwedler. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Please come forward. And those in opposition have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Or if you're in support, you can go and speak as well if you're a member of the public. Opposition, come forward.
All right. So just to move it, just click it. Is that it? Or to move the slide?
Yeah.
Just okay. Got it. Perfect. All right. All right. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Olson. I am a resident of Forest Park, formerly Cameron Park. Been resident for 18 years. I work with my fellow neighbors on our development committee. And as Jamie mentioned, we have been talking with Jamie Ashley, the attorneys for the owner, and talked with Ira as well with the city on this rezoning request. So we've been working diligently, and we just wanted to share some more information for you as you consider this rezoning request. We are not in favor of this rezoning. This site borders our low-scale residential neighborhood. It's encroaching on our neighborhood, which is that St. Mary's Street border. As you'll see throughout my presentation, that there is no proposed plan for this site at the moment, so the conditions are very important. We appreciate the conditions that have already been considered for this site, but as you'll see, there is much more to be considered. And we believe that the current zoning that could go up to 5 stories is fair and is what needs to stay there. So our recommendations, if you were to consider this rezoning, is to look at a 4 stories max along St. Mary's, not to exceed the 52 feet in height. If you go along West Johnston, that would be a max of 8 stories, not to exceed 95 feet in height. The next slide, I'll show a mass modeling that was done of an architect on our committee that can really show you the density there. We feel the height max is crucial because you can talk about stories all day long, but until you really look at what the height levels are, that's really important. Wanted to add a traffic study. We really just are emphasizing the importance of this before the rezoning approval is done. We have Weil Elementary 3 blocks away. We have Broughton High School 2 blocks away. We have high school drivers. We have, parents picking up kids. We have a lot of different pedestrian issues going on St. Mary's. Glenwood Towers, as noted, is a few blocks away. Lots of seniors ride their wheelchairs down West Johnston Street to access the Village District, groceries, pharmacy, healthcare. The presentation noted there could be a potential 356 units on this site that would exacerbate traffic, pose a safety risk, and as noted, there are no subsidized affordable units expected to be in this site. This mass modeling that was done shows you and illustrates it's looking from West Johnston in Forest Park south. You'll see that's St. Mary's border, so that's a 5-story there, back to 12 stories. This is inconsistent with any other type of development along St. Mary's. There are no other parcels west of Boylan Avenue that's zoned at CX 12. And I'll show you some more examples. So this is a 12-story mass modeling. This would be dropped down to the 4-story there on St. Mary's, back to 8 stories, which would be much more in line with that St. Mary's Apartments that you'll see there on the left, and in line with sort of the density and the scale that's in that part of Raleigh. This rezoning is inconsistent with our Cameron Village and Hillsborough Street small area plan. That was zoned to the neighborhood mixed use, not commercial mixed use. That's a 3 to 4 story max there on St. Mary's and Johnston, and then going down Johnston would be 7 stories. And I did want to remind the Planning Commission that their Bagwell rezoning request on Hillsborough Street a few years ago was denied because it was inconsistent with these small area plans. We've also seen more inconsistencies with the Raleigh's comprehensive plan than consistencies, and it's inconsistent with the future land use map. The downtown edges inconsistency, is not transitioning to height, scale, and design. It's inconsistent with the downtown transition areas, as the policy states, with these boundaries that are located directly next to our residential neighborhood, and they do not taper off. It's inconsistent with reinforcing the urban pattern. As I mentioned, there's no other stories developments that pass that. The threshold of Boylan Street is really where we start seeing that urban pattern. So as Jamie noted, yes, there's 40-story rezoning cases that were approved. That is south of us and east. There is nothing that is passing the Boylan Street barrier or boundary. It's inconsistent with the compact development, the current site, that zone. There's not an abundance of parking space. We have a rezoned case that was just approved last year for 200 apartments going in at Bellwood, which also borders our neighborhood there next to the Village District. It's inconsistent with creating investment opportunities. This area does not need revitalization. We have Glenwood South, we have the Village District, we have Hillsborough Street. There's plenty of upscale shops and restaurants nearby. It's inconsistent with the future land use map. If you'll see, again, those properties on West Johnston Street, I think Ira mentioned that high-density residential, it's inconsistent with that language, and it quotes, it's depending on location and context, and certainly next to a low-scale residential neighborhood like Forest Park, this would be inconsistent with this policy. I wanted to also note, again, the traffic issues, safety concerns that we're already feeling with St. Mary's Apartments. You've got 712 Tucker, the Devon. There's a lot more congestion and traffic along St. Mary's. Finally, I wanted to share again the precedents that are set on St. Mary's Street. And I know this Planning Commission is really supportive of the precedents that are set in this city with development. St. Mary's Apartments, 4 stories on St. Mary's frontage, 5 stories back down West Johnston, 712 Tucker Street, that's a block down from this site. 4 stories on St. Mary's, 5 down Tucker Street. The Devon, it's an 8-story apartments, but it's on Boylan and then going down Tucker, but does not touch St. Mary's Street. You've got the Paramount condos, again, Boylan Street, at 6 stories. There's a new development on Peace. I think it was rezoned as 12, but there was a lot of pushback. That's only going to be 4 stories. That's right there next to the Starbucks and McDonald's. And then you got the Cameron Crest condos that are 2 stories down St. Mary's Street. And in conclusion, I just wanted to summarize the inconsistencies with this rezoning request, the precedent set on St. Mary's and West Johnston, the policies in the comprehensive plan, the inconsistencies with the future land use map, the inconsistencies with the small area plan, and that plan was put together in good faith with a cross-section of our community, so we feel like that should be honored. I hope you'll consider these recommendations, and thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any additional members of the public here to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll move on to questions and comments from commissioners.
I can start. I come at this from the perspective of I was an immediate neighbor. I used to live at 712 Tucker in a past life, and I'm very familiar with this area. I would say generally this this area is, the city is growing, and we have to figure out where to include density, and this type of area in Glenwood South and the Boylan transition area is exactly where we are trying to put density as a city, with walkable amenities and restaurants, multi-use buildings, and the like. When I was living at 712 Tucker, I was struck that right in that area, there was not a whole ton of walkable retail right there. I think that 712 Tucker itself, given that the first floor was not activated as a retail use, probably in hindsight, may have, could have been better decisions at that time for helping develop a more walkable neighborhood. One of the concerns that, one of the issues that came up then, and again, this was over 10 years ago, so, was a lack of, or inadequate pet waste facilities walking up and down that street. I noted that that was a concern of the neighbors, that the neighbors listed. Did the applicant consider including that in the event this is redeveloped as residential?
We are happy to include that. That wasn't, it was something that was discussed. The other things kind of took precedence, it seemed to. So we're happy to consider that. I also just did want to clarify, this is not in the small area plan. So I know that was a discussion, but not technically in it. It's outside of it. But yeah, we're happy to consider the pet waste.
Okay, thank you. If it's developed as residential, I know that there's an option also for office. So, but adding to that, I very much appreciate the neighbors' concerns in Cameron Park with respect to the height and the noise, and so I appreciate the limitations that were, the conditions that were put as under condition 7 to try and alleviate those concerns, including no outdoor dining, and so that they're, and closing at 11, so this isn't going to be a place for bars and that kind of traffic. Were there any other conditions considered? I was trying to come up with one, but to limit, or I didn't hear any specifically requested.
You mean in condition 7 and with respect to the uses? We had a pretty good discussion on several different occasions about which types of uses, and that's when the breweries and wineries were actually added in, because they actually gave an example of trophy brewing, how that can be a brewery, but operates in a very neighborly kind of fashion. So they wanted those added back in, and then the discussion of the hookah cafes took some doing and some time, but that was added in as well. There's apparently an existing one in the area that's caused some noise issues.
Sure.
But no additional requests as far as I'm aware.
Okay. I'm just trying to pull up. I will note some of the other development that has occurred in this area to the south is because it was in an overlay district that we as a planning commission have sort of examined and noted that neighborhood conservation overlay district has largely sort of outlived its initial intended use, seeing as how it's largely turned commercial, and that we're seeing a large dense development pattern. So I am sensitive to the neighbors' residential concerns, but at the same time trying to balance that with the fact that if not here, where do we put density in the city?
Thank you. Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from commissioners?
I have a couple. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Is this development, is this site, this is not within inside the Christmas plan, if I'm not mistaken, right? This is outside the boundaries of the transportation boundary. So we would potentially see, because Boylan and St. Mary's are two-way avenue, we would potentially see some above-the-curb bike lanes get installed there, and I wondered how that impacted your thinking about the sidewalk and the design you had up on the slide. And I also note that there's in the 10-year priority bike plan has Johnston Street here as a separated bike path. And since but it's not a two-way avenue, it's a main street, which I believe that the cross-section will not require the construction of above-the-curb bike lane here. So I was wondering if I could I'd like to ask you about the bike lanes on St. Mary's, but then I'll talk to staff about what it looks like for the bike plans for the T3 map and how we might get something like that in the future.
Sure. My understanding is that that the bike lanes would be required on St. Mary's and Boylan, and not necessarily required on Johnston, but aspirational. The issue we have with, and then that would be required at site plan for St. Mary's and Boylan. The issue we have with adding bike lanes on, well, I'll answer the first part. The request specifically for the increased planting was on St. Mary's because of the property to the south has kind of an additional planting area. And so we were trying to make sure we incorporated a wider sidewalk and planting opportunity there. It also helps to kind of push the development back a little bit, and we have the room to do it there. We don't have as much room on Johnston because of the narrower cross section, because of the development of the St. Mary's Apartments on the north side of the street kind of limit what that cross section could be, and because the assemblage is very narrow in that location. I don't know if I can bring a plan back up, but there's the Tucker development to the south, and it's separated by a very narrow area where Pigeon Creek needs to outlet and be treated. So we just don't have a lot of space on Johnston. We do have additional space on St. Mary's, and we were trying to incorporate some of the concerns from the neighbors. So that's how that kind of developed in that location.
Hi, and good morning. I'm going to speak to your question on the separated bikeway that's possible on Johnson Street. And so currently within the existing right-of-way that we have, the existing pavement, there is an opportunity for them to do a one-way bikeway just completely within the existing pavement. And then it would also tie into another site plan that's further up in the village area that they are already currently working on a separated bikeway facility, so it'd be a nice sort of like connector, especially that aligns with the 10-year bikeway plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. It sounds as if there's a technical revision that needs to be made to the case, and then there's also providing some conditions related to pet waste. Are there other things that need to be addressed?
I don't know if they need to be addressed. I would just like to comment that I appreciate the applicant's efforts here, and again, trying to be consistent with past comments. I talk a lot about the public realm, so I appreciate them looking to work with the neighbors and provide that along St. Mary Street, understanding that it does cut into the site and might have some impacts on the bikeways. The height restrictions along that residential edge, I think, is appreciated. I do notice the location of the site along St. Mary Street, the way those existing residences are oriented and the existing conditions there, I think are appropriate with the developments on either side and then moving up to 12 stories. So we talk a lot about that, so I want to say I appreciate that as well. I talk a lot about the architectural materials. A lot of time applicants are not willing to put that in the conditions. So again, I want to commend the applicant for that, as well as the crosswalk. I mean, again, we talk a lot about safety and other things. I think the commercial is warranted here. So I think even though it's inconsistent with the future land use map, I think it's warranted. I think that's evidenced by the residents also coming to the applicant and requesting that, and then working diligently to sort of find a medium ground on that. So I appreciate the comments on the bikeway and the pet stations. I think this is a great plan, and again, just trying to be consistent with some of our comments. I think the applicants addressed a lot of the things that we talk about, so I want to say thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett and then Commissioner Otwell.
Thank you. I also appreciate the efforts the applicant has made to address neighbor concerns. And I appreciate the neighbor bringing her concerns. I share her concerns about the precedent that we would be setting along St. Mary Street. I do recognize the other developments, but like she said, those are more around Boylan and not so much along St. Mary's. So once we allow one, then future development will come and say, well, you've allowed this one, so let's be consistent. And I don't know if we want to see this type of height along St. Mary Street. We talk a lot about Raleigh growing and trying to make sure we focus that growth in a way that is thoughtful. And I certainly want to do that, but I sometimes feel like we aren't giving enough respect to the existing neighborhoods, the neighborhoods that are already here, that have been here. Maybe we're looking back on them now and saying, well, geez, those perhaps should have developed a different way, but they're here. And these people are living here. And I just think we need to be more thoughtful when we are looking at these new developments, new people coming in, and be more respectful of the existing neighborhoods that are there and think about, do we want to put this type of height right up against low-scale residential? Whether or not we think it should be low-scale residential, it is. It's kind of like what I was saying earlier. Planning doesn't have the greatest track record. And sometimes we've allowed things to happen that 20, 30 years from now, we say, oh, we wish we hadn't allowed that. I don't want us to do that now and have a commission sitting here 20, 30 years from now going, what were you thinking? And I just think some of what we're recommending is not honoring the people that are already in place.
Thank you. You just said something that I'm going to interject with a question to make sure I understood. Is there a height limit on St. Mary's? And what is that height limit on St. Mary's?
There is a 5-story height limit from St. Mary's, 150 feet to the east, so kind of the fatter portion of the building, and the 5 stories matches the 80-foot height limit that's in the UDO.
Okay, thank you. Apologies. Commissioner Otwell, I know you had a question as well.
It was just a comment. I appreciate the conditions that have been added and the work with the neighborhood. I am a little uncomfortable with the conditioning parking back into the site. We've just had a text change to remove that from our downtown kind of development, and I think the intent was to see less parking in these kind of developments. I understand the concerns of the neighborhood, and I think if it gets too bad, they have a remedy they can use through a parking permit program, and I'd like to, in general, don't like to see those kind of conditions added back in to reduce or increase the kind of parking we require.
Thank you for your comment. Are there additional comments?
I just wanted to add one more. I wanted to thank Commissioner Bennett for those thoughtful comments, and on their own, I completely agree with you. And in this case, the precedent that it would set, it's really only one additional, I guess it could be 2 additional parcels immediately to the south, only affecting one other bordering one other resident on St. Mary's, because otherwise it's not, everything else along St. Mary's is a school or is commercial already. So I certainly understand that generally, but this setting a precedent, I'm actually, in this specific instance, given the extent of commercial and school usage along St. Mary's on these several blocks, I am comfortable with that in this case.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Haver?
Sorry, because I do want to mention, too, kind of picking up on Ms. Bennett's comments. If you look at Tucker Place, though, and I drive this street regularly, but it's amazing how you see things differently when you're walking through Google Earth. But the Tucker Place essentially is a 5-story building, but it's back when there was no blank wall. And we've got this, in my opinion, and something that I've been advocating for consistently up here at the Planning Commission is an undesirable streetscape from some previous planning requirements where there's blank walls, there's no entrances, there's gravel along the area there with a small sidewalk. So again, I think, in my opinion, taking it in context, listening to the neighbors and to some of my fellow planning commissioners, I think that this is appropriate. I don't think that the scale, the 5 stories along that area, 150 feet, is out of context with what exists. And I think actually with the conditions written in, I think we're going to get a better product than if we didn't. So I'm just saying that now so that I don't say it at the next meeting because I know it's going to be old business and we don't like to hash things back out. So I'm taking the time now.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you. So I just want to check in with the applicant. It looks like we're deferring the case to October 25, and that gives a sufficient amount of time for some of the additional conditions. Okay. All right. Without objection, if there's no other comment, this case is going to be deferred to our next meeting, which is October 25. Moving on to the next item, which is F.3, acknowledging it is 12. We are likely losing a quorum in approximately 10 minutes. Just quickly, item Z6222, I'm assuming we can defer to our next meeting, October 25, okay? And we will at least get through the staff presentation for Z5722, which is McLean Drive and Old Wake Forest Road assemblage.
Thank you very much. This is a request to rezone 12.6 acres from R6 to RX4. Your deadline is late next month. The predominant zoning in this area is industrial, although note the prevalence of commercial zoning to the west and south. Aerial view, larger area. Closer in, note Falls of the Noose and Old Wake Forest Road intersection in the commercial center there. Here are some streetscapes. This area is kind of a donut hole, I guess we term that. It's unannexed area surrounded by corporate limits and has been for many years. Here's some additional streetscapes. A couple of conditions, some prohibited uses and a cap on the number of residential units. Note the changes here, not dramatic, although there is a 4,000 square foot office and retail entitlement. Scores well, transportation energy analysis. It is served by Route 2. Scores well on affordability analysis. It does show a higher percentage of minority and low-income populations than the city average, a higher under age 5, over age 64 than citywide, a slower rate of increase in median gross rent, however, and no restrictive covenants or historical restrictions found. It is consistent with the Flume designation of medium-scale residential and consistent with the comprehensive plan. There is no urban form guidance. This is part of the Midtown Area Plan. Number of consistent policies here, including 3 of these Midtown policies as noted, and the key policies above. There are no inconsistent policies, and your deadline for action. There's one further meeting, October 25th, and actually 2, November 8th, before the deadline of November 26th. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I believe we have enough time for the applicant and those in support. They have a total of 10 minutes to speak. I just want to make sure, are there members of the public here to speak on this item? No? Okay, go ahead, please. Thank you. No worries, no worries.
That's the second time I've done that today. Just leave the applicant hanging. There you go, just up and down.
Hi, good morning, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Ashley Honeycutt-Terrazas with Parker Poe. I'm working with the applicant on this case, and I'll be brief. Like Don mentioned, this is about 12.6 acres. Infill site, a donut hole of unannexed land in North Raleigh, just north of where Wake Forest Road becomes Falls of the Noose, at about 1.5 miles north of the Beltline. It currently has a handful of older single-family houses, and our request would allow for much more housing to be built on the site. And as the staff report mentions, it's walkable to transit service on Falls of the Noose, and there's also a Go Raleigh connector on Millbrook Road just to the north. It's across the street from existing apartments and townhomes on Old Wake Forest Road, and it's also very close to significant commercial development to the west and to the south there. You've got the Lidl, the Walmart, and the Fall Center Shopping Center just across the street to the west. Also, Atlantic Avenue to the east, and this site will one day connect to that. We're requesting to rezone the site from R6 to RX4CU, primarily to be able to provide more housing to meet the city's housing need in an area on the edge of Midtown that's already walkable and bikeable to transit and many commercial services. This request is squarely consistent with the future land use map's medium-scale residential designation, which envisions RX zoning with 3 or 4 story height limit. We've chosen RX4 and incorporated conditions to respond to that context. Also on the edge of the Midtown plan, which the only guidance is these 2 planned streets that when completed are going to increase connectivity in the area, and there's no contrary guidance in the Midtown plan for this site. The streets are also in Raleigh's street plan, which means that we'll be required to build them on our property at development. It'll eventually connect that Pacific Drive, I don't know if you can see there, to the west, to Atlantic Avenue in the east, and then Craftsman Drive to the south, which goes all the way down to New Hope Church Road. I'll also just note that Old Wake Forest Road is designated as an avenue 2-lane divided, which means that we're going to be required to widen, provide street improvements such as sidewalks, planting area, et cetera. And this is just puts our conditions up there again. Again, this is, we prohibited several uses that would be inappropriate for the site and cap for the number of residential units to clarify the density we're seeking. And again, staff found this case to be consistent with a number of policies related to the site's suitability for denser residential development than what's currently in place or allowed on the property under the current R6 zoning, and the staff did not find any inconsistent policies. And so just to sum up, this request is completely consistent with the city's future plans for the property, and we respectfully request that you vote to recommend approval. And with that,
Thank you.
I'm happy to take questions.
Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Personally, I don't have any questions on this one. I'm ready to move on it. No? I'd like to entertain a motion if there are no questions or comments.
I'll move to approve case Z5722 and to adopt the proposed consistency statement included in today's agenda materials.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Second. Vice Chair Miller has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z5722. Commissioner Otwell has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor and any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. If we can do it in 3 minutes, we can move on to approval of the minutes as our next case we would not be able to get through, and we're going to defer that to our next meeting. So in the backup material, there are minutes from 3 sets of meetings. Other than the edit noted earlier during one of the cases from Committee of the Whole, are there any additional comments or edits on any of the minutes? Commissioner Bennett?
On the infrastructure and mobility minutes, agenda item 3, it says CP 10B22 TW Alexander Drive. That was actually Tryon Road.
Thank you. Any additional edits or corrections?
I had some minor just typo edits, but I emailed them, and I think that that should be sufficient.
Okay.
Not requiring a vote.
Right. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended per discussion.
I'll move to approve all 3 of the minutes contained in the agenda materials with the edits that mentioned here.
And is there a second? Second, Commissioner Bennett. And by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Also, in your backup material, you will see the report from the Assistant Director. I recommend you read it because it's chock full of fascinating information and tells you when your next meetings are, should you have trouble scheduling. All right. Do you want to talk about retreat?
I can. Just a reminder, it's a week from this Friday, so Friday, October 21, from 9 till noon. We're working on location now. I don't know that we've received confirmation back, but you will receive an agenda and all of the logistical details at the end of this week.
Excellent, thank you. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Any update on the text change committee meeting time next week?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, we talked with staff and we decided to change our meetings to Wednesday. So the next meeting will be October 19th, 4 to 6. And that'll be consistent going forward.
At the
on
same
Wednesday.
location? At the
Same
location?
locations,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
I just wanted clarification. I'm Tom Johnston here on Z6222. When would the next meeting be, the 25th?
Correct. The next meeting is October 25.
Okay. Yeah, I hate we didn't get to it because it would have been just like the last one you voted on, so.
I hate it too, but you'll be talking to chairs in about 20 seconds.
I understand. I understand. Well, I appreciate the efforts to get there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, that concludes our meeting. Thank you.